I first registered my TV Tropes account in 2010, and yet in spite of that, I still have not seen one of that site's most darling shows, Steven Universe. It's strange because TV Tropes is the reason I started this channel in the first place. Sitting in the quad on my college campus, binge reading pages on my phone was how I passed the hour-long wait between classes. In retrospect, I maybe should have done my homework or studied with that time, but it's a few years too late for that level of hindsight. After years and years of a trope-first approach of any sort of media consumption, I eventually broke through that mentality to begin appreciating what I watch on a deeper level. This made me appreciate some of my favorite shows so much more, to the point that I felt like I had to explain to strangers why I love these shows so much. A few years later, I start making video essays on YouTube and yada yada, now we're here. I don't normally talk about myself in these videos because I prefer to keep the tone of my channel more professional and thus detached, but I can't realistically do that with a show I've never seen, so it's necessary to mention a bit more about me during this video, if only so what I already know going into it will make it easier to justify my reactions. Not my immediate reactions, though. This video is what I dub a React-trospective. That means I won't record myself watching the show and making faces at the camera, and then re-recording the faces at the camera while pretending it's the first time I'm seeing the video till it's better content or whatever. Instead, my plan is to watch through the series and write my reactions to each episode individually, so it's less, oh, this is just like the thing with the guy from the place, and more, slightly more eloquent. I can at least look up character names between watching and discussing the episode. This comes with a few downsides insofar as keeping the discussion of each episode relevant and interesting, though. For one, in the earlier episodes of each season, I'll still be learning character motivations and dynamics and so on, so more of the episode sections are dedicated to just explaining what I thought happened in the episode, because I'm yet to know what is tonally relevant and what sort of themes will come back to be important later. Is some random object in the background going to be a plot device later on? Is an episode's entire plot just a silly character moment that doesn't contribute to the overarching plot? So, until I'm more confident on what is and is not relevant, this video might still be a little more matter-of-fact instead of retrospective, at least at first. Anyway, I would love to start the video out by saying that I'm totally unfamiliar with the series outside of its high reviews, the fact that it's launched the careers of a lot of people involved, and the fact that it has a TV Tropes page the length of a short novel, but well, I'm on the internet. I've seen spoilers. Contextless spoilers that don't really get retained, but there are bound to be some aspect of the show that are really cool reveals that I see coming because someone on Tumblr posted about it years ago, and seeing a specific frame woke up something in me like a very lame sleeper agent whose task is to spoil TV shows from last decade. Before I start, you have probably already noticed this is not much of a video, but a narrated blog with a slideshow of screen caps in the background marginally related to what I'm talking about. This video is not meant to be watched so much as it's meant to be listened to in the background while you eat lunch or you jog or you play games on another monitor. Alright, anyway, no more stalling, on to the first episode. Gem Glow. Steven is lamenting the loss of Cookie Cat, his favorite ice cream brand that's no longer in stock. Upon returning to his house to tell the gyms about this, he's immediately attacked by a bunch of monsters. The other gyms don't really seem to mind this, viewing the giant bugs as more of an annoyance than anything else. The conversation even continues on in spite of the battle. This establishes pretty quickly the expertise of the fighters. They are experienced at what they do. After this fight, Steven discovers the freezer is stocked with Cookie Cat, as the other gyms heard it was discontinued and didn't want Steven to go without his favorite treats. While enjoying one, his gym begins to glow, though he fails to manifest his weapon during this short time. Steven gets a short lesson on how to manifest a gym weapon from the others, which doubles as a quick introduction not to the gyms as fighters, but their personalities too. Pearl begins with a speech about flower petals with a hint of chaos theory, along the lines of the petals falling in a seemingly random pattern, but they're actually influenced by gravity, wind, and the like. Amethyst says that summoning a weapon comes naturally, manifesting hers to cause some property damage. And Garnet says they're both right, that he has to train really hard, but also not think at all, to make a weapon appear. This advice doesn't work though, and Steven decides to rely on something more consistent, eating ice cream while having everyone stand exactly where they were before. When this also fails, he grows upset, only for the other gyms to offer him comfort by saying he's still one of them, even if he can't conjure a weapon yet. With this bit of praise, he's finally able to manifest a shield that bounces around the house before destroying his TV. The idea being that Steven didn't manifest his shield because of ice cream, but the thought behind them buying so much ice cream. The centipedal from earlier returns, this one much larger, and the gyms rush outside to defeat it. warning Steven to stay inside as his powers haven't yet manifested and it's too dangerous. But Steven ignores these warnings, wanting to eat some ice cream and save the day. When the gyms are pinned down by acid spit, Steven gets the monster's attention, though eating so much ice cream only manages to give him an upset stomach, not a shield. After his mini fridge is destroyed, he gets angry and swings at the beast, electrocuting it and making an opportunity for the others to take it out, where it collapses into a smaller gym. Steven's still unsure how to summon his weapon, but he now knows it's not with the discontinued ice cream. Laser Light Cannon. Steven and Amethyst are eating fry bits, the leftover bits of french fries, when they notice a second sun in the sky. Pearl and Garnet are already investigating this, calling it Red Eye and observing that it's getting closer and closer until presumably it will smash into Beach City, Majora's Mask style. They plot out what to do about it, lamenting that Rose-Quartz isn't there because if Steven's mother was, things would be much easier. When they mention the titular laser light cannon she used to own, Steven suggests that they ask his father about it, as he might still have some of his mom's old stuff. But the gyms are hesitant to talk to him, preferring their method of throwing Amethyst over and over. Steven rushes over to Greg's car wash, where he tries to wake his father up by setting off his van's alarm, and a sleepy Greg exits to ask Steven what's up, before noticing the red eye. He takes Steven to a regular, non-magical storage unit, where he may or may not have the laser light cannon kept because it didn't fit in his van, which he also lives in. Steven equips himself to enter and crawls through the maze of junk, fascinated by the various old things his father has, like CDs from a failed musical career as a one-man band and a photo of him and Rose-Quartz. Steven accidentally smashes this photo while crawling over it, but Greg reassures him that if every pork chop were perfect, we wouldn't have hot dogs. Then, Steven finds the cannon. They hook it up to Greg's van and drag it through town as Steven insists on playing Greg's song, Let Me Drive My Van Into Your Heart, for motivation. They arrive to see that the red eye is close enough that it started to affect gravity, pulling the van away as Steven starts trying to activate it. None of the gyms knows how to do this, rubbing Steven's gem on it as he tries various passwords and phrases to no success. Steven thinks he's failed to stop the red eye, but Greg assures him it's all fine, and Steven repeats his phrase about hot dogs, which activates the cannon at last. It begins to fire, and the gyms all chip in to aim it, taking out the eye with a rose-shaped laser beam. Greg tears up at the sight of her before noticing his van is being pulled away by the tide and running over to save it. Through the episode, there's a disparity between the way the gyms speak of Rose-Quartz and the way Greg is both mentioned and portrayed. Rose-Quartz is this almost divine figure, spoken of with reverence as they consider her to be powerful enough to solve any and all of their issues with little effort, to the point where they're even unsure about touching her old stuff. Greg has this old stuff shoved haphazardly into a storage unit, because he doesn't fit it into the van he lives in. He has a failed music career, a failing current career, and overall seems like a relative loser to everybody but Steven, who finds all his old failures not as failures but adventures of their own. It's the fact that he's willing to see the best in people that makes him able to ignore other prejudices and actually talk to those who can save the day, even if he can't save it himself. Cheeseburger Backpack. Tired of feeling like he's too useless to be brought along on missions, Steven orders a cheeseburger backpack to carry extra stuff on the missions the other gyms go on, hoping this will get him invited. The others are about to leave for the Lunar Sea Spire to place the moon goddess statue at its top, which is supposed to prevent this tower from collapsing into the ocean, and Steven convinces them to take him with them, offering to hold the statue in his backpack. He packs kind of randomly, placing random objects like a stuffed toy named Mr. Squeezy inside while throwing out other things like first aid kits. The gyms take the warp pad over where they see that this spire is falling into the ocean. Steven at first has to be rescued, convincing Pearl that he ought to stay behind for his own safety, but the others give him another chance to prove himself, which he does by overcoming a gravitational trap by tying together some sweaters. Amethyst hops across with her whip, praising Steven's solution as they head deeper into the ruined tower. Pearl's horrified by the decay on the inside, remembering it didn't always look so bad, implying they've been here before when things were much better off. They discover this decay is due to crystal shrimp, who have taken over the building, hastening its destruction. She comes up with an elaborate plan to get around them, though Steven simply tosses a couple of sandwiches on the ground that the shrimp go after instead of the group. The next obstacle is a flowing river that's cut off their crossing, but Steven is once again prepared because he packed an inflatable raft, which immediately floats away due to the strong current. Garnet simply knocks over a pillar to make a bridge and they cross, saying that the strategies can't all be winners. So far, all of the obstacles have been navigated with ease by one of the others. Amethyst leaped across the first gap, Pearl strategized through the second, and Garnet made a bridge over the third. Each of the challenges fitting their particular strength so well to the point where there's barely a difficulty at all. The final challenge is to actually place the statue where it belongs, and after digging through his backpack for a while, Steven realizes that this challenge, carrying the thing he said he would, is impossible because he left it at home. He offers the Mr. Squeezy to the pedestal instead, and after a little bit of glowing, it explodes, and the entire tower starts to fall. The four of them emerge from the water, with Steven apologizing for ruining everything, but he's cheered up when they point out that 2 of his 4 ideas were successes. And then the raft floats back up to the surface, making it 75%. Together breakfast. The house is empty, so Steven takes it upon himself to cook breakfast for everybody, making a stack of pancakes with syrup, popcorn, and a single strawberry. He dubs this Together Breakfast, as he wants everyone to eat it together, though he gets tired of waiting for everyone to show up. Garnet comes in holding a cursed scroll and then ignores Steven because she needs to destroy it, as well as his phone because he took a picture of the scroll. Amethyst comes by to tease Steven with the water gun, but she's distracted when Pearl enters, chastising her for having one of Pearl's swords in her room. Not wanting to be left alone, Steven forces his way into Pearl's room, where he sees her placing her swords where they ought to be. He tries to swim Together Breakfast over to her, only to get swept away by the water currents and pulled down, and then upside down because the water does not obey the usual laws of physics. He lands in Amethyst's room, where she's busy de-organizing everything after Pearl cleaned it for her, saying that she had a system to find these things that has been disrupted, upset because the reason she has so much junk in the first place is because Pearl's stuff keeps washing down to her. Amethyst tries to eat Steven's Together Breakfast, but he doesn't want to serve it to her because they're not all present yet, and she chases him through a series of bizarre hallways before ending up in a room with the Crystal Heart. At first, Steven's excited that they have 3 of the 4 of them in one place, but then he begins sliding down one of the blood vessels into darkness, and then a bright pink room, and then more darkness, before he ends up in a room with a pit full of lava where Garnet's preparing to burn the scroll. Steven tries to offer Garnet some Together Breakfast, but this distracts her long enough that the burning scroll escapes its bubble and begins attacking. The gems draw their weapons, but are quickly overpowered as the spirit begins to possess all the organic matter around it, meaning it lunges for Steven's Together Breakfast and starts to grow massive. Once the others are taken out of commission, he's the only one left standing, and Steven pushes his Together Breakfast monster into the lava pit. Once it's gone, the 4 head back to the house to make a new Together Breakfast, better than the first one. But once it's complete, they realize that after the previous fight, it's not very appetizing. Frybo. Pearl is searching for a gem shard capable of turning clothing garments sentient, though Steven doesn't pay attention to her lecture about this shard because he's too busy thinking about his missing pants. He finds the pants wandering around on their own after Pearl leaves, chasing them down and eventually overpowering the jeans, which he then puts on. He finds the gem shard and places it into a sock, realizing he can order it around a bit before leaving to go find Pearl in town. He is stopped by the Frybo character mascot, with PD inside of it, getting chased around by seagulls before exiting as he says he hates his job. This gives Steven the idea to, at first, climb in the suit itself, but then place the gem shard inside so it will dance on its own. They order Frybo to go make people eat french fries as the 2 boys head into town to kill time. They arrive at the arcade where PD laments that working in the fry suit is not what he wanted because it's a menial job that he hates doing. But the reason he's actually working this job is more so because he wanted to prove to his father, Mr. Fryman, that he was capable of doing it. This didn't have the intended effect though, as Fryman keeps calling his son by the name of the mascot, so he's not even getting what he wanted out of the work, and yet quitting would only make his father resent him even more. Steven doesn't get the time to talk this out with him as they hear screaming coming from nearby, Frybo having grown grotesque limbs as it holds people down and force feeds them fries. One of these people is Mr. Fryman himself, who still believes it's his son inside the costume, as he apologizes for pushing his kid too hard, claiming he only wanted him to be the best Fryman he could. Pearl then intervenes, attempting to take out the fry monster only to get sprayed by ketchup and blinded. So Steven takes over by taking her gem shards and placing them in his own clothing, making an army out of his outfit, and attacks Frybo, holding him down so Steven can pull the shard out from inside. They then take Frybo to the ocean where Mr. Fryman lights the greasy suit on fire in a Viking funeral. he tells his son that he won't be getting a new suit, and will let his son work alongside the rest of the family like normal. And then Pearl tells Steven to put his clothes back on. Cat fingers. Steven and Greg are having a water fight while cleaning the mayor's re-election mobile. Steven sprays Mayor Dewey with the hose, and Greg offers to comp the wash for him, with Steven justifying this as the opportunity to win political favors. Then they meet Amethyst, shapeshifted into a cat, who sprays them more before showing off her powers a bit. Greg's off-put by magical stuff, so he leaves, and the other two return to the Crystal Temple, where Amethyst offers to teach Steven a bit about how to shapeshift. Pearl warns him about shapeshifting, saying to start small and simple, and Amethyst agrees, trying to get Steven to focus on turning into a cat. Steven sort of succeeds, turning his finger into a tiny cat, and he immediately sets out to show this to everyone he can. First he takes the cat finger to Greg, who's weirded out by it. Then he shows Sadie and Lars at Big Donut, and Lars sarcastically says the cat doesn't have any friends. So Steven conjures more cat fingers, heading to the fry shop, where he asks Petey for fry bits. Ronaldo takes a picture of Steven's cat fingers, which now number 10 as they eat, and Steven realizes that he doesn't know how to unmake the cats. He returns to the Crystal Temple, where he attempts to ask for help, but the other gyms are on their way to a mission without him, and he can't swim over to join because the cat fingers hate water. So he stays home, trying to focus on remaining not a cat. But this doesn't work as he begins to grow more and more cat heads. Without the gyms for help, Steven runs to Greg, who's still not comfortable around anything magical. Steven asks for help, with the two realizing that the cats hate water and will shrink away if sprayed. Though Greg's hose isn't enough to stop the cats, and he has to turn on the big sprayers inside the car wash. As the steam clears, it's revealed that this worked on the Akira monster, and Steven returns to the dock to greet the gyms with cat puns, as it's clear they underestimated him. Bubble Buddies. The gyms are investigating recent frequent earthquakes while Steven's trying to impress a girl reading on the beach by riding his bike back and forth, though he only manages to fall over and embarrass himself. The other gyms, having watched the whole thing, concur that Steven must have a crush on this girl, and they all offer differing advice, like Pearl treating Steven like a child and trying to set up a playdate, or Garnet saying he needs to just talk to her. But Steven tells him not to throw off his funky flow, and that he's going to try again as long as they promise not to watch. He grabs a glowing bracelet out of the freezer and heads to the beach, where he attempts to introduce himself, only for one of these earthquakes to knock a rock loose, with Steven diving in the way and creating a bubble around the both of them. Once safe from these falling rocks, Steven introduces himself as being magical, which Connie doesn't seem too taken aback by, merely comparing Steven to her father, who works as a traveling security guard. Steven then realizes he doesn't know how to get rid of the bubble, and the two are trapped. His plan is to have the duo push their bubble to the Crystal Temple to ask for help from the others, but they struggle with the incline, and the soundproofing on the bubble makes it impossible to call for help. Undeterred, Steven tries to go off to his other friends for aid, doubling as an introduction of Connie to several other Beach City residents, rolling the bubble to Big Donut, where Lars makes fun of Steven's date gone wrong, as Sadie fails to smash it with blunt instruments. They then head to the wharf in search of a harpoon gun to pop it, asking Onion to shoot them to safety. Connie shows off an impressive amount of knowledge on the boats there, saying that she spent a long time at beach towns watching the boats rather than talking to people. Onion finally shoots the bubble, only for the harpoon gun to fail to pop anything. They then go to the amusement park, as there's plenty of danger there, and Steven plans to have the bubble burst by hitting it with a roller coaster. Connie points out that this plan is bad due to not knowing what comes after the coaster hits them, but Steven ignores the long-term issues to roll in the way, only for them to be battered into the ocean, where they sink. Steven tries to calm Connie down once they're at the bottom of the ocean, telling her that the giant worm they see swimming around is only going after red plants and isn't a carnivore. And then the worm is revealed to be the cause of the earthquakes, breaking a hole in the ocean that they sink even deeper into. Now trapped, Connie cries over the fact that they're going to drown or starve before she's ever made a friend, and then Steven shows her the bracelet. He says that she dropped it a year ago at the parade and that he's been waiting to give it back to her since. Once she's cheered up, the bubble finally bursts, and they rise to the surface, where the worm starts attacking the two. Steven realizes that the worm is after the glowing bracelet and uses it to lure it through the supports of the pier, which eventually crushes it. The other gyms arrive, where an excited Connie tells them all about their day, though Garnet picks the others up, saying they ought not to mess with Steven's funky flow. Serious Steven. The episode opens on a scene of destruction at the pier, flashing forward 2 weeks later as Steven is brought along on another adventure, in spite of the warnings of Pearl that he needs to focus instead of messing around with his ukulele. They arrive at an old battlefield, strewn with swords and butterflies, where they come across a massive gem temple and enter, looking at the carvings on the walls for a while as Steven messes around with the artifacts, opening up a hole in the ground that they fall down. They're now in a round room with doors on every side and no apparent way out, so Garnet tells Steven he needs to get serious and go with her, while the others stay put, and Steven announces he is now Serious Steven. Steven and Garnet then head into one of the hallways, where they have to go through a series of physical challenges. Steven falls on the glowing floor puzzle and needs to be rescued. He nearly gets crushed by spikes and needs to get rescued, and he passes out when he sees the next trapped room, also needing to be rescued. While passed out, he recalls the spinning teacup incident from the start of the episode. Steven was feeling woozy and leaped out of the ride, landing on Mr. Smiley and breaking the controls as the ride malfunctioned, throwing everybody off of it, and getting Steven banned from all the rides in the future. Steven wakes up at the end of the room, having been saved yet again by Garnet, only to realize that they're back where they started. Pearl and Amethyst are confused as well because they've also noticed that the rooms don't make sense, but Steven remembers the spinning from the teacup rides and suggests that the rooms themselves are moving in circles. Garnet simply punches through the ground and confirms this fact when they see several rotating gems under the surface, and Serious Steven asks Garnet to throw him towards the center to dismantle the trap himself. He grabs the gem and the temple vanishes, with the four reappearing in the field, as Steven picks up his ukulele and declares that he's now Silly Steven again. Tiger Millionaire. The gems return from another mission, with Pearl chastising Amethyst for being too reckless, a lecture she ignores to return to her room. That night, Steven catches her sneaking out and follows, watching as Amethyst enters an underground wrestling league with the persona of the Purple Puma, serving as the event's heel and beating up the other wrestlers. Steven confronts her about this, not to criticize her but in awe as he looks up to the fact that she can go on stage and act however she wants to, rather than being bossed around by Garnet and Pearl like he does. So to experience the same freedom she has, he creates the persona of Tiger Millionaire, knowing it will get the crowd to boo him as well. The Purple Puma accepts him as a partner so she can win a tag team tournament, telling him to sit back while she does all the fighting. But Steven's quick to pick up on the lingo and behavior, pretending to bribe other contestants or using exaggerated rich guy behavior to knock out opponents. The two heels start to get more and more fans, including Lars, who one day asks Steven for an autograph only for Tiger Millionaire to push him away, as he thought he had to stay in character all the time. This reflects the learned behavior of Amethyst. She's okay with being the heel in life as it gives her more freedom not to listen to others when they tell her what to do. But sometimes you do need to put away the heel personality if it involves someone close to you. Steven feels bad about pushing away his biggest fan, but goes to the championship match with his partner the next night anyway, only for the fight to be called off when Pearl and Garnet enter the arena, chastising Amethyst for using her gem powers against humans. They start fighting for a while until Steven grabs the microphone and comes up with an in-character backstory for the Purple Puma, that he just wanted to find a place where he would be accepted and thought wrestling would be that place. The crowd is moved by this speech and turns to cheer for Tiger Millionaire and the Purple Puma as Garnet and Pearl pretend they were trying to end all wrestling, allowing themselves to be defeated. In the end, they win the belts with the help of the other wrestlers, and Lars' faith in wrestling is restored. Steven's Lion. The crystal gems are in the desert on another mission, though Steven's tired and sweaty due to needing water and shelter and such. So they leave him behind while they finish the job, with Steven resting in the shade before he discovers a lion. He's afraid at first, but the lion seems tame and Steven quickly takes to the creature, telling him all about his day and so on. The crystals return from their mission shortly afterwards, carrying with them a pillow gem that Amethyst says she'll bubble later on. Steven has to say goodbye to the lion as they return home, with Pearl warning Amethyst not to be careless with the gem, lest it touch sand and make another castle. Back at the temple, Amethyst still hasn't bubbled the gem, taking a nap instead. And then Steven hears a scratching at the door where he sees the lion has returned. He's happy that this lion came all the way to visit him, playing games with it, although the lion mostly just stands around. This is a lion that closely matches the color scheme of Jones-Qaurtey, a character we've seen very little of, but who I can already tell is going to be one of those characters that the narrative is built around. Her absence itself is a character that we see indirectly through lions and Greg's past and other artifacts. Stephen tries to take this lion into town to show it off, though when he attempts to show other people, the lion leaves and Stephen looks like a fool. It's interesting that people did believe at first that Beach City has so much other stuff going on that a boy with a magical pink lion is mundane enough not to get a shocked reaction, but not so mundane no one bothers to check. Stephen returns home where the lion is once again scratching at the door, this time breaking in to stare at the gym pillow. Stephen's frustrated that this lion's so unresponsive, so he takes the pillow and throws it out of the house. It then fuses with the sand on the beach to grow new castles. The others try to stop this expanding castle, but Stephen rushes in too, falling down and being rescued by the lion. It becomes clear that the lion was always interested in protecting others from the unbubbled gem, and it uses a sonic voice to break the sand away, clearing a path for Stephen to grab the crystal. In the end, Stephen prepares to say his goodbyes to the lion again, only for the other gems to decide that there's no harm in keeping a lion as a pet. Arcade Mania. Stephen is ruining a stealth mission by wearing a loud coat, though Garnet is able to easily take out the Gym of the Week with a few punches, in spite of also having to rescue him. As a reward for another job well done, Stephen offers to take the trio to the arcade for some fun, setting up each of the crystal gems with a game he thinks fits their personality. Pearl, always playing by the rules, gets really into a GTA clone where she follows all the traffic laws and such. Amethyst is introduced to Skee-Ball, which she immediately begins cheating in upon hearing that there are prizes available. And Garnet is shown a few fighting games, which she destroys by actually trying to punch out the figures in the machines. Eventually, Mr. Smiley discovers that they're wrecking the place up and threatens to kick them out, so Stephen, Amethyst, and Pearl exit, leaving Garnet behind because she found an unfortunately named rhythm game. It's a bit of a running joke that the crystal gems struggle to understand human activities and behaviors, despite putting in so much effort to guard humans, the sort of thing that would certainly come back thematically later. The next day, Stephen is using his metal detector on the beach to find more quarters when he's attacked by some of the drill gems from the fight at the start of the episode. He rushes back to the temple where the others have been caught off guard due to the fact that Garnet never warned them of an incoming invasion. They run out to go find her, with Stephen having the others check the arcade, where they do find her, still dancing to the music. Stephen attempts to unplug the machine, though Garnet repowers it herself. He tries beating her in the game to end the winning streak, but she defeats him easily. Finally, Stephen realizes that she has been entranced, as her revealed third eye is dizzy and spiraling. So he destroys the game to break her free. Mr. Smiley catches Stephen causing this property damage and forces him to sweep the floors to pay him back, as Garnet leads the others in dispatching the drills. Giant Woman. Stephen's refereeing a game between Pearl and Amethyst involving checkers and water balloons, but the two of them keep arguing over the results that culminates in them saying that they never form Opal anymore. Stephen asks about Opal, and it's revealed that two gems can fuse together to make a stronger version of themselves. Amethyst and Pearl's fusion is called Opal. Stephen bombards them with questions about Opal, but they don't answer these until Garnet returns, saying they have a new mission to track down gem beetles. They're split up, with Stephen going with the two arguing gems to the Heaven Beetle, as Garnet, who's fireproof, goes below the surface. They go to a large mountain and start climbing, with Stephen befriending a goat while trying to come up with the various excuses to see the others fuse, even singing the titular song Giant Woman to urge them on. They ignore this singing though, as the two fusing won't work due to no emergency situations calling for it. Even Stephen, falling off of a floating rock, gets rescued by Amethyst using her whip to lower Pearl to catch him. They make it to the top of the mountain where the Heaven Beetle ought to be, only to find an empty, tiny house. While investigating this house, a giant bird swoops down and eats Stephen's goat companion, so they take cover where Amethyst and Pearl agree to form Opal together with a dance. But Amethyst's erratic dancing doesn't mesh well with Pearl's ballet, and the fusion fails, and while trying to get them to stop fighting with each other, Stephen's eaten by the bird. He awakens inside of the beast's stomach, where he sees that the goat is okay and chewing on the Heaven Beetle. After wresting control of it from the goat, he's pulled out of the bird's stomach by Opal, a giant woman who resembles Lakshmi, who also fuses with Pearl's spear and Amethyst's whip to make a bow that shoots down all the smaller birds flying after them. Opal sings a bit of the song Giant Woman to Steven before they return home, giving Garnet the other beetle who has bubbled safely away. She congratulates Steven on getting the two to work together by saying he'll make a good fusion one day, which Steven's shocked to hear he's capable of doing. Opal herself gets very little characterization outside of a brief fight scene against a swarm of birds, this episode being more about the concept of fusions than the fusions themselves. To fuse, the two need to be on the same wavelength, so to speak. Garnet uses the word harmony to describe fusion. So we see the two unable to fuse after a whole episode of disagreeing with one another, only to put their differences aside once they finally agree on one thing: saving Steven. So many birthdays. While searching through Amethyst's room for the source of a foul smell, Steven comes across an old portrait of the gems, learning that gems are effectively immortal because they don't age as humans do. Steven's takeaway from this conversation is that they've never celebrated a birthday and are thousands of years behind, so he takes it upon himself to throw birthday parties for all of them. First, he tries to teach Amethyst about piñatas, assuming that she'll be the most interested in a tradition where you get to beat something up and get candy as a result. But Amethyst is mostly just confused as to why he wouldn't just give her the candy directly. Then he throws Pearl a party where he dresses as a clown, only to get saved when he tries to fall into a pie for a bit. This only makes Pearl uncomfortable, especially when she fails to understand his jokes, assuming he's just making up lies about her. Finally, he tries to have a kazoo racing day with Garnet, though the others point out that these birthday celebrations might be failing to entertain them because they're too childish. This causes Steven to walk around the town in an existential crisis as he realizes that growing up means leaving the things he loved as a child behind. Then Steven's crystal begins to react to his emotional state, his fear of growing older, and he starts to age physically. He tries to enjoy the things he did as a kid, like games at the arcade, and still does, just telling himself that he's not supposed to enjoy childish things and putting them away as he ages further and further. Steven enters Big Donut where Sadie and Lars don't recognize him, and he's shocked by his reflection in the mirror, deducing that he needs to have a reverse birthday. He staggers to the beach and is carried the rest of the way by Lion, shocking the other gyms with his aged appearance. They attempt to recreate the childish birthday antics, Amethyst transforming into a tiny car, Pearl attempting a clown routine, and Garnet just slapping him a bit, all to no success. But once they argue among themselves, Steven tells them to grow up, and he reverts to an adult, slowly transforming back to his childish self as he's reminded of the childish things he's been doing all along. Steven's gem reacts to his emotions, which is why he's able to conjure shields when he's happy with his friends, but he can also produce one when he's trying to save somebody. He himself has to be rescued quite a few times during the show thus far, but from what we, the audience, have seen, it might be useful, albeit not wise, to allow him to keep failing, if only so his sense of self-preservation conjures his powers again. Here, his lack of self-preservation and sense of mortality is doing the opposite, so it is a logical assumption. Lars and the Cool Kids. The crystal gems are at a gulch, watching a moss inside of it slowly devour anything that comes near. They explain that this moss was planted by Jones-Qaurtey years ago because she found it beautiful, though the others are just seeing it as gross and wonder what the appeal is to it. Unable to stop it from gnawing at anything nearby, they simply block the gulch off with a bit of police tape and call the job done. It's interesting how they react to this plant, seeing it as disgusting but not wanting to destroy it outright or lock it away in a bubble like they've done to so much else, due to Jones-Qaurtey's affinity for it. A similar affinity she has for things like Greg and anything on Earth. The crystal gems don't really understand Jones-Qaurtey's personality, but they don't need to understand something to respect it, just leaving it be. Steven leaves this gulch to get some lunch where he sees Lars trying to impress some other kids, though they just walk right by the guy, paying him no attention. Hearing his scheme, Steven intervenes to talk to the cool kids directly, and he convinces them to take him and Lars along for a ride. While riding through town, they learn one of the kids' father is Mayor Dewey, as well as learning about the seemingly incomprehensible preferences of the kids there, claiming things are gross and then liking them, or saying they wanted more affection growing up, only to say the lack of it made them who they are. Lars also keeps flip-flopping on his own personality to try and match the others, but fails to keep up because they don't seem to know either. Steven, on the other hand, remains consistent in his values and is praised for them regardless of what he's actually saying. This group then arrives at Dead Man's Mount, the gulch from the start of the episode with moths growing inside. They cut through the police tape set up by the gyms and start swimming, though Steven refuses to go in the water and he pushes Lars out of the way. Before Lars can chastise Steven for preventing him from fitting in, the moss overtakes the others and they're soon encased in plant life. Steven remembers something Pearl said about his mother taking the moss up to the cliff nearby and convinces Lars to drive them up there. They struggle to do this because Lars doesn't know how to drive stick, but do eventually break near the top, dragging the mossy teens up the hill but failing to reach the top as they become overwhelmed by the spreading plants. And then the sun rises and the moss begins to bloom into flowers that all blow away, freeing everybody and drawing their attention to Beast City as Steven gives Lars the credit for saving the day. Onion Trade. Steven can't find his Ranger guy, part of a complete set of guys, and he asks around to see if anyone else has seen it. Pearl says that he wouldn't lose things as much if he kept his space more organized and didn't leave the window open, and Amethyst compares Steven's room to her own, saying she can always find what she's looking for, assuming she bothers to look. Steven leaves to ask Greg if he's seen Ranger Guy, recalling that Greg first bought him the set a year ago at the beach. Greg remembers that day mostly because they had a delicious funnel cake, rather than the guys he bought his son. He does, however, give Steven a bag of quarters from the car wash to go try to win new guys and complete the collection, so Steven rushes over to the arcade. He attempts to win a new Ranger Guy but only gets 30 Dave guys instead, eventually draining the machine of everything it has. He then sees Onion walking away with a Ranger Guy in his back pocket, following the kid around where he sees him haggling with everyone he meets before sitting at the pier and throwing food into the water, and then his father briefly speaks to him. Steven then offers all of his Dave guys for Onion's Ranger Guy, but Onion keeps turning the offer down, with Steven returning home defeated. Here, he sees Amethyst on the porch, having found Pearl's replicator wand in her room, and she offers it to Steven to haggle with Onion better. Steven at first tries to offer the kid even more copies of Dave Guy, to no success because Onion wants the wand instead. The episode then cuts to Steven on the beach with Ranger Guy, trying to entertain himself but failing to do so. Steven spent the better part of the episode upset that Dave Guy is worthless, and yet he still tries to trade a bunch of worthless guys to a figure with more sentimental value. The value coming from the fact that he got the guy while spending a fun day with his dad. No amount of sitting in front of a gacha machine is going to compare to that, so of course the Dave Guy has no value, and of course the Ranger Guy obtained in a trade won't have sentimental value either. Steven then gets hit by a Dave Guy ball, turning around to see an entire tidal wave of them appearing from Onion, who's mass-producing them. The Crystal Gems rush over to find the source of this wave of junk, trying to get closer to Onion but being pushed away by the cars he's now replicating at them. Steven swims underneath the surface of the balls, emerging next to Onion, and then noticing his initials on the boots of Ranger Guy, revealing it was his missing one all along. Steven says that the trade is invalid because the figure was stolen, and Garnet smashes the replicator wand, causing the Daves and the cars to disappear. Steven then realizes that Onion only stole the figure in the first place because he was jealous of Steven's relationship to his father, and he forgives the boy. Steven the Sword Fighter. The best way to see the role a character plays in a show's dynamic is to take them out of the show for a while to see what happens. This has been the way the audience is learning about Rose Quartz thus far, and this episode is the way we see this dynamic contribution made by Pearl. The Crystal Gems are watching Lonely Blade 4 together, as Pearl criticizes the depiction of swordplay from the movie, offering instead to show a better display of fighting to Steven that he immediately accepts. Pearl then takes them to a battlefield in the sky where she uses her powers to create a sparring partner named Hollow Pearl. The two proceed to fight as Pearl narrates her techniques. She then offers to teach the basics of sword fighting to Steven, starting off with simple footwork. But Steven grows impatient watching this slow show because he wants to do the boomerang blade technique from his movies, to which Pearl tries to temper his expectations by saying that sword fighting's about patience and waiting for an opening. Then Hollow Pearl stabs her in the back as she finds an opening. Pearl disintegrates into dust and Steven starts to cry, only for Garnet and Amethyst to comfort him by saying that gems can reconstitute once heavily damaged and it only takes some time. But weeks pass and Pearl still hasn't reconstituted herself yet, with Steven getting impatient and trying to spend time with the Hollow Pearl instead. Hollow Pearl doesn't want to do any of the chores around the house that Pearl used to do, only wanting to practice various levels of sparring with anyone nearby. Amethyst and Garnet tell Steven to stop hanging around with a fake Pearl and wait for her to reform, but they don't enforce this because Amethyst has eaten a piece of cloud she got on a mission, and Garnet's trying to stop her from floating away. Steven tries having fun with the Hollow Pearl, but fails to connect with her at all, accidentally telling her to attack a tree as she keeps interpreting his speeches as orders for attack. She even breaks the TV again when she sees the swords from Lonely Blade 5. Steven has enough of this behavior and pushes her, initiating combat mode again. He flees from this battle, throwing various things at her, before recalling the lesson from before about finding an opening. He copies the boomerang blade technique from the movie, and because it isn't a real technique, the Hollow Pearl doesn't have a counter for it. She's destroyed just as Garnet and Amethyst return, with Pearl reforming afterwards. But upon seeing the state of the house and the others, she regrets having left themselves to themselves for so long. Lion 2, the movie. Connie and Steven are watching the trailer for Dogcopter 3 and are excited to go see the movie together. The other gyms wonder why they would want to see a movie about a shape-shifting dog when Amethyst can shapeshift into a dogcopter for them, but Steven insists on going with Connie anyway. As the theater is far away, Steven decides to ride Lion there. Connie's jealous of the fact that Steven has a pet lion and lives with magical gyms, and wonders why he chooses to hang out with her, especially because she has a boring life with the coolest thing about her being the occasional tennis lesson. Steven then rides around on Lion, something Connie's unsure about doing because he doesn't have any training with lions, to which Steven says he lacks training as well, and then Lion takes a turn towards the ocean, using his sonic voice to open a portal. The three of them then arrive inside of a gym armory with a pedestal in the middle. Connie feels like she doesn't belong in there, but Steven explores around anyway, eventually getting his hand stuck on the pedestal, where he keeps accidentally requesting swords and armor and the like with his conversations, the armory responding to him even though he doesn't realize this. When Steven decides it's time to go watching some explosions in the movie, the armory produces a robot that begins launching explosions at the duo, chasing them around the room. Steven and Connie get on Lion to flee, exiting through a portal back to the movie theater. Once here, Connie begins to question why Steven wants to hang out with her and watch movies when he can visit secret armories and ride lions and hang out with the crystal gems. But Steven doesn't seem to understand why he can't enjoy these things and spend time with Connie and also see normal movies and so on. The robot from before returns, threatening Steven and Connie once more. So Lion produces a sword from his head and gives it to Steven, though after the events of last episode, he's not very confident with the sword. So Connie grabs his arms and uses what she learned in her tennis lesson to deflect the missiles, eventually serving one back at the robot, which explodes. The two then join Lion in the movie theater to watch Dogcopter 3 together. Beach Party. The crystal gems are struggling to fight against a giant wind pufferfish, trying to distract it so Garnet can come in for a finishing blow, only for her to get pushed back into a storefront. Amethyst simply bats the pufferfish away further into the ocean, saying they can just deal with the gem later. They head out to check on Garnet, seeing her laying on the front of Fish Stew Pizza, which has been destroyed. She's okay though, and the crystal gems head back to the temple, but the owner of this store, Kofi Pizza, is upset that they destroyed his restaurant and then left. Steven is distraught about this, trying to get the others to care that they're causing property damage, as they're supposed to be protecting Earth, something he doesn't think they can do if they're not also protecting its people. This calls back to earlier episodes, where the crystal gems have struggled to understand human traditions and behaviors, all in spite of the fact that they've all lived here for hundreds of years. The Pizza family, that's their real last name, bans the crystal gems from the restaurant, and the crystal gems don't seem to care. So to remind them of the importance of community, Steven invites the gems and the pizzas to a beach party to mend the feud between them. He does this with a barbecue and a bit of beach volleyball, splitting the teams up to force people to work together, though each player starts cheating in some way, be it through the use of gem powers or messing with the net. This only makes the two groups argue even more, and then the pufferfish returns, attacking the beach party. Nanafua Pizza decides to take charge, using the same strategy from the start of the episode to distract the pufferfish as Garnet and Amethyst superheat the sand into sharpened glass, all while the others use the net to push the gem into the spikes. This gem explodes and the day is saved, with the pizzas unbanning the gems from their establishment, although Pearl still isn't sure what they were banned from in the first place. Rose's room. Steven eats several cans of creamed corn to find mini golf coupons attached, hoping to take the crystal gems out golfing, but they're busy with the mission and they ignore him. So he passes the time by playing a golf video game, unlocking the secret ending, but not being able to watch the cutscene because the gems have returned and are lecturing him about what they found, accidentally breaking his TV with a sound wave in the process. Steven gets angry and wishes for a place where he can be alone, and then his gem begins to glow, responding to the door which he then opens to enter Rose's room. Once inside, Steven wonders how Rose slept without a bed, only for a bed to appear. He then starts asking for more and more things appearing in front of him before wishing for a donut, only to learn that the food the room conjures cannot actually be eaten. Steven then wishes for a door out of the room so he can eat something real, and he's taken to the outside of Big Donut. But Lars and Sadie are acting strangely, standing still and speaking in unison while messing up his order. Steven leaves, where he runs by several other citizens of Beach City, all of whom are acting equally strange and only partially responsive. This serves as a sort of recap of several of the events that have happened thus far. The only parts of Beach City Steven sees are parts that were prominent in previous episodes, even quoting lines they spoke in those episodes, and very little else. Finally, Steven encounters Greg, who's behaving more normal than anyone else in Beach City. Steven relaxes a bit, trying to explain what's going on to his father, though he just gets weird sayings and unrelated platitudes. Steven then realizes he's still inside of the room because he can't eat one of the donuts, and the entire space starts to fall apart chunk by chunk. He watches Beach City disappear before falling through the ground, where he is then asked by the room what he wants. Steven wishes to go back to the gyms, and he's pushed out of the room, checking to see if they're real before feeling thankful they are. In the end, the crystal gems all play mini-golf, just like Steven wanted. Coach Steven. While at a malfunctioning crystal gem communications hub, the gems are trying to figure out a way to take it out before it can cause more damage, eventually resolving to simply break it. So Garnet fuses with Amethyst against Pearl's wishes to form Sugarlight, and Pearl refuses to let Steven watch the fusion dance, eventually leaving the area once the debris from Sugarlight's violent destruction of the pillars injures him. Steven returns to Beach City eager to show off his scars from the battle, but Lars and Sadie tease him when his bandages reveal a tiny scrape on his forehead. After seeing Lars struggle to open up a jar, he decides that all three of them need to strengthen up to be more like Sugarlight, and he has Greg build them a makeshift gym on the beach. Steven grabs a megaphone and begins coaching the others on how to be stronger, and as Pearl watches them all pursuing strength, she sings a song about strong in the real way, about how she would rather Steven not focus on power but a different kind of strength. Pearl's unsure about the Sugarlight transformation despite Garnet's reassurances, as she doesn't think such a powerful gym has the self-control not to be violent. So when she sees Steven trying to get buff, she worries that some of that behavior is going to rub off on him, that he might idolize the wrong people for the wrong reasons. These reasons are things natural to Sugarlight, as they're both features that Garnet and Amethyst both have. Garnet is strong and decisive. Amethyst is impulsive but confident. Combining these traits together makes a personality so overpowering, both physically and otherwise, that it takes over the minds of the gems that make up the fusion. They both mention they lost control of themselves at the end of the episode. The next day, Steven is too sore from his workout to move when Sugarlight returns, having had to walk home after destroying the warp pads. They are angry about having to do this, and they take this anger out on Pearl and the others, with Pearl trying to hold off Sugarlight herself to no success. So Steven picks up the megaphone again and starts encouraging Pearl to be stronger in the real way, just like her song, and she uses her head to lure the rampaging fusion to the cliff, where she hits the rocks beneath their feet to knock them to the ground, crushed by her own falling weapon. Amethyst and Garnet apologize for losing control, as Pearl is excited about the rush she feels from battle. Joking victim. Amethyst pranks Steven with spicy fire salt that makes him run to Big Donut to cool off. He makes a mess that Lars slips in, and he asks Sadie, who he calls his player 2, to clean it up because his back is too injured to do it himself. Sadie complains that she's always the one who has to clean up Steven's messes, but does it anyway. Lars then says he's in too much pain to work, so Sadie gives him the day off, while Steven volunteers to take over the position. He watches an instructional safety video, learning that Mr. Smiley used to be an R&B singer, and begins to work a shift. He enjoys this work so much that he asks Sadie to fire Lars so he can work there full-time, though Sadie turns this down, saying that she believes Lars is a good person deep down. citing a night where she stayed up with him after waiting in line for a video game. So to cheer up Lars while he's sick at home, they decide to bring him a few presents of donuts. Though, they see Lars and his cool kid friends hanging out while Lars is bragging about how he fooled Sadie by faking an injury. Sadie runs off crying because she realizes how little he respected her, not only to take advantage of her kindness, but to brag about it afterwards. Sadie's always had feelings for Lars, and as a result, thinks of him as a better person than he is. She is willing to overlook his flaws as misunderstandings about his real personality, but to see him bragging about these flaws later means that they're not misunderstood but flagrant. Steven then gets the idea that, to get even with Lars, he'll pour some fire salt on a donut and give it to him, talking Sadie into the idea after Lars returns, still faking his injury. Lars eats the spicy donut and begins to breathe fire, which Steven finds funny, though Sadie thinks they might have gone too far and follows him around with a fire extinguisher. Steven chases after him, finding Amethyst nearby and telling her about the fire salt he used, which Lars overhears, trying to attack Steven for burning his mouth. But Sadie intervenes and said that it was her idea, taking responsibility for the prank, but justifying it by saying she was upset over Lars taking advantage of her, not only by faking his injury, but throughout their entire lives. Steven uses the opportunity to use the choking techniques he learned from the employee training video to get the donut out of Lars's throat, and Lars apologizes to Sadie, with the two making up. Steven and the Stevens. The crystal gems are searching for an hourglass in the Sea Shrine, though Amethyst grabs the wrong one and the shrine starts to collapse. Steven grabs one he thought looked nice before they all leave, arriving back at the temple with the mission failed. Steven then leaves to go to the Beach-a-Palooza, a concert he and his dad are supposed to play together. But while recruiting his father, he learns Greg is stuck at work due to an oversized boat being stuck in the car wash. Steven wishes he could go back in time to stop the boat from getting stuck so his dad can play in the band, and the hourglass he took takes him to the past, where he gets to warn his father and the boat doesn't get stuck. Instead, the car towing it hits a power line and burns the car wash down. So Steven goes back in time again to stop himself from stopping the boat, saddened that his father will miss the concert, but getting the idea to form a band with his alternate selves. They go back one more time to make 4 Stevens, forming Steven and the Stevens out of the quad. To tell themselves apart, they give each Steven a number and a personality, telling them to be either smart, funny, sensitive, or handsome. But the Stevens start to question how, if they're all the same person, they can be more of one trait than any of the others. The lead Steven tries to force them into their roles, but they only take this as a sign that Steven doesn't think that Steven, or Steven are handsome at all. Feeling insulted and frustrated, Steven gets some fresh air while pondering what it means if he finds himself annoying. And then, he notices the other 3 Stevens have made a new band, with Amethyst drumming, that he's not a part of. To get the band back in order, Steven goes back in time to stop Steven from starting Steven and the Stevens, but Steven, and Steven also go back to stop Steven from stopping Steven. Steven goes further back to other Stevens of the past, pursued by more Stevens, until arriving at the beginning where Steven first picked up the hourglass. Dozens of himself all appear with him, each one fighting all the others, when the lead Steven tells him not to fight himself anymore, and that he has to accept not only the things he dislikes about himself, but dislikes about the rest of the world so he isn't so overwhelmed. Steven smashes the hourglass, and all the other Stevens turn to dust while the sea shrine collapses again. In the end, Steven and the Crystal Gems perform at the Beach-a-Palooza, singing a song about how traumatized he is after watching himself die. Monster Buddies. The Crystal Gems are in a snowy mountain fighting a monster with one attack taking off its arm. Steven winces at the sight of the monster being injured, but Garnet quickly dispatches it with a punch, powerful enough to make the roof of the cavern start to collapse. They need to get Steven out of there quickly, so Garnet bubbles him and sends him back to the lava room in the temple with all of the other bubbled gems. Steven then struggles a bit before escaping this bubble, and as he is falling, he also frees the centipedal from the first episode. Steven realizes that this gem isn't attacking him, and he tries to befriend it, interrupted by the returning crystal gems, who try to protect Steven until he steps in to defend his new pet. They agree to give Steven a chance to raise and reform this monster, chaining it to a rock outside the temple and waiting with their weapons raised. Steven thinks that the weapons are scaring the creature, so he tells the others to stay inside as he talks to it, luring the centipedal with chips closer until it seems to be tame. Steven is then attacked by a seagull, who's also after the chips, when his pet spits acid at it, defending him. He shows this new acid trick to the other crystal gems and suggests that his new pet will be useful when they return to the ice caverns and clearing the way to get closer to the artifact. They are hesitant to believe that this centipedal is tame enough for this, as its acid spit keeps melting other things too, but Steven and his gem friend are useful in making it deeper into the caverns until they arrive at the room with the shooting star. Garnet equips her gloves as the star is too hot to touch for even a gem, and the creature gets scared at the sight of her weapon, spraying acid everywhere and causing the ceiling to begin collapsing. Steven once again tries to stop the others from fighting it, hugging the gem tightly in spite of being burned by its acid as he does so, and it starts calming down, until a stalactite falls down, nearly crushing Steven until it dives in the way to save him. Steven laments that his new companion is crushed and manages to bubble it himself, which impresses the other gems on top of them already being impressed by the extent to which he was able to tame it. It's revealed that Rose Quartz also used to try to tame corrupted gems herself, but failed to do so many times in the past. That Steven would do so himself mirrors Rose Quartz's attempts, especially as her attempts were failures that she kept doing anyway. Steven knew that the monster was dangerous, he had fought it in the past, and he was being burned by it, but kept trying to protect it anyway, even standing in front of his friends to give it a second and third and a fourth chance and so on. Much in the way that Rose Quartz had an affinity for the things nobody else saw appeal in, Steven is finding himself intervening on the behalf of what other people consider to be monsters. He is his mother's son, after all. An indirect kiss. Steven and Connie are having a picnic at the top of the cliff, with Connie noticing that Steven's feeling bad about something. She tries to start a conversation, asking him about the new addition of a fence around this cliff, and he tells her the story about how Amethyst was messing around at the top of it when she accidentally fell off, while taunting Steven by saying she wouldn't. Amethyst appears unharmed at first, but when Pearl inspects her gem, she sees that there's a small crack in the front, causing Amethyst to deform in weird ways like an oversized eye. So Pearl declares that they will build a fence around the cliff so no one will ever fall off again, and the story ends. Connie wants to know what happened to Amethyst's cracked gem though, so Steven continues the story on the condition that he gets to wear her glasses while she gets his juice box in the exchange. The crystal gems tell Steven that Rose Quartz had healing tears that could repair broken gems, and because Steven has his mother's gem, he ought to be able to heal Amethyst too. But he tries to make himself cry and fails, so they go to Rose's fountain instead, where there should be a spring that can cure these wounds. This spring is overrun by thorny bushes though, and they can't access it, so Garnet blasts away to the fountain, only to find it's dried up. While Garnet and Pearl leave to find the water's source, they leave Steven and Amethyst together. Amethyst's condition is getting worse, and Steven's attempts to make himself cry by using pain don't work because the thorns start growing sentient and attacking. He takes cover inside the fountain, where he starts to cry over the fact that he's messed everything up and can't even use his mother's magic to be useful. Steven recognizes that sitting in his mother's old spring and being surrounded by her garden beneath an image of her is supposed to be an emotional moment, but he finds himself totally unable to feel anything in this place because he never knew his mother, so it's just some random garden. He does, however, feel regret that he doesn't feel anything, and this causes him to start crying. His tears don't cure Amethyst's gem, but the fountain does activate, with healing water flooding over them and fixing her up as the roses surrounding the duo bloom. Steven thinks he's saved the day, but Garnet and Pearl reveal they simply undid a clog a ways off, and he never had any real powers. This reveal is why Steven is sad in the present, as he's concerned he can never go along with the crystal gems on any of their missions, as well as the fact that the power he inherited from his mother doesn't exist in him, so he has no real connection to her. But Connie's feeling a headache, realizing that her glasses are causing it as she no longer needs them. This causes Steven to deduce that it was his leftover spit on the juice box that contains healing powers, and he celebrates his newly discovered healing spit. Mirror Gem. Steven learns about school from Connie, specifically about summer vacation, which means he doesn't have to go to school. He asks Pearl to set up a school for him. Her first attempts fails, but when she hears that Steven just wanted to learn, she gives him a gem mirror that can be used to relive any moment from gem history. They try asking it a few questions, but the mirror stays blank, with Pearl assuming it doesn't work. Thinking this means Steven is now on summer vacation, he heads outside to go hang out with his friends, where he bumps into Lars, who tells him off. Lars and Sadie discuss their summer plans as Steven heads out to find more adventures, nearly getting run over by Mayor Dewey's truck before the mirror tells him to watch out by using Lars's words. Steven realizes that the mirror can communicate by playing back anything it's heard, and he uses his knowledge to teach the mirror a few jokes that it repeats during a speech by the mayor. Steven is excited to show off the mirror's sentience to the other gyms, but the mirror repeatedly tells Steven not to tell them, and to keep the fact that it can communicate a secret. But Steven's certain that they'll be nice to the mirror, and he takes it back to the temple anyway. As the mirror predicted, the crystal gems are horrified at the thought that the mirror is communicating rather than following orders, eventually seeing Steven talking to it, where they decide it must be destroyed. Steven attempts to protect the mirror from the others, accidentally knocking off Garnet's glasses and realizing she's furious, so he flees the temple, running to the beach. Here, the mirror pleads with Steven to protect it, using pieces of sentences from the episode to tell him it needs to be freed, then showing Steven ripping the gem out of it. Steven does this as a rune forms at his feet, and the gem transforms into the shape of a woman. This woman introduces herself as Lapis Lazuli, and she implies that it's shocking Steven would save her, considering he's a crystal gem. The others arrive, weapons readied, and Lapis Lazuli asks Steven to run away with her. Steven defends her from the others, but refuses to go with her, so Lapis creates a wave and runs into the ocean, leaving the others behind. Ocean Gem. Steven is in trouble with the crystal gems after the events of the previous episode, but he doesn't get time to ponder this as Greg rushes in, concerned about the fact that the ocean is gone. Steven packs his things to go bring the ocean back, as he considers it his fault it's gone in the first place for freeing Lapis Lazuli. Connie, Greg, Lion, and the rest of the gems agree to join him, and they set out on a summer road trip to find all the water. As they're driving, Steven laments that the gems are fighting other gems, but Pearl informs him that all the monsters they've been fighting thus far are gems, just corrupted ones who have to be controlled for their own good. They find a massive pillar of water in the middle of the dried-up ocean bed, and Steven approaches, with Lapis Lazuli projecting herself onto the side of it to tell him to leave her alone. Steven ignores this and gets attacked by his reflection, as the rest of the crystal gems are reflected out of the water as well. They fight themselves, getting split up and outmatched by their own power sets, combined with the ability to transform into a liquid, and Steven and Connie are picked up and nearly drowned, save for Greg's intervention. Seeing how hurt everybody is, Steven declares he wants the fighting to stop, and he manifests a shield that shoots out a shockwave that dispels Lapis's power. He then enters the stream of water, getting carried up to the top where he finally meets Lapis looking up at the stars. She says she just wants to go home, but can't because her gem is shattered and her powers are too weak. Steven offers to use his healing spit to cure her cracked gem, which causes Lapis Lazuli's eyes to return to normal as she sprouts 2 wings of water, finally able to fly off. The water pillar collapses back into the oceans, with Lion portaling him to safety near the van, and they all manage to return home inside one of Steven's bubbles. The people of Beach City are celebrating the return of the water and thus their livelihoods, when the other gems have an aside conversation. They realize that one of the gems has managed to leave Earth, and they're unsure what is going to happen next. The dynamics set up by the first season thus far are interesting in a few different ways. Firstly, and I'm unsure where else to include this observation, it's so common for a group of heroes in a fictional setting to be 3 or 4 guys with a token female character, to the point that the inverse is a bit refreshing. Not so much given another decade since to normalize that cartoons aren't just toy commercials for little boys, but at the time this was likely more groundbreaking. Next is that we assume that the crystal gems are the good guys because we get their perspective, but so many of the good things Steven tries to do get shut down by their efforts. This is anything from trying to heal corrupted gems instead of fighting them, to recognizing when somebody is distressed and trying to help them out even though he doesn't know the full story. And while it's implied that there is far more to the story than Steven is led on about, it's better to judge his actions based on what he sees instead of the things that he doesn't. House Guest. Greg tries to assist Pearl in fixing up the van following the events of the previous episode by wrapping it in duct tape, but Pearl insists on doing it herself because Greg is too injured from the battle to stand. Because Greg can't move well, Steven offers to let him live with the crystal gems during his recovery, but the gems aren't too sure about this arrangement. Amethyst reminds Steven that he has healing powers, and Greg doesn't need to be chairbound and living with them. Steven attempts to heal his father's leg with his spit, but after laying his hands on him, Greg is still too injured to stand, and Steven begins to worry his healing powers are not functioning. Greg moves in with the crystal gems after all, and he spends more time with his son, something he's wanted to do more of recently due to the fact that Steven nearly died last episode, and he's afraid of losing any moments with them. After their bonding montage, the gems take Steven away for a mission to repair a giant geode that's containing a storm. Steven's unsure about leaving his father unattended, so Garnet gives Greg a flute that can activate the warp pad, told only to use it in emergencies. The first emergency is Greg testing out the flute, pulling Steven away from the geode. The second emergency comes from Greg not being able to find the remote. And the third is Greg wanting to show Steven a funny commercial. In spite of all of these distractions, Steven's still able to find time to put some of his spit onto the geode, but this doesn't work and the rock remains cracked. Steven returns home upset that his healing powers have gone away, but the other gems leave to find some other way to repair it. Steven sees Greg standing up on his bad leg, dancing around the kitchen just fine. When he realizes he's been caught, he apologizes to Steven for lying and admits that he really was healed back at the car wash. Since Steven's powers are based on his mental state, he wasn't able to repair the geode due to not believing he had powers. So Greg and Steven return to fix it for real this time, with Steven laying his hands on it once more, but this doesn't work, so Greg simply duct tapes the rock together and the storm above it subsides. In the end, Greg leaves to live alone again, and he gives Steven the tape just in case. Space Race. The crystal gems are investigating a few warp pads that could take them up to space, but once again they're all inactive. While explaining what they used to be able to do, Pearl laments that she's been stuck on Earth for thousands of years and will continue to be there for a long time. Later on, while watching cartoons with his dad, Steven suggests that they build a spaceship, and the two have a montage together of constructing one out of wood and whatever leftover materials were in the Universe family shed. After the construction, they show off their new spaceship to Pearl, but it's made of wood, and their plan to get into space is to launch it off of a tiny ramp. They prepare for the test run as Greg tells Steven it's okay to bail if things are going wrong, and they predictably do as Steven leaps out at the last moment before a crash. Pearl chastises them for building such a bad rocket and thinking it would actually fly, correcting their calculations on a whiteboard and slowly developing a functioning design for a ship. All of the talk of building a real spaceship reminds Pearl of the time she's had traveling the stars, and as she explains how great things used to be, she talks herself into building a better rocket ship with the rest of them. But Greg refuses to allow Steven to actually go into space, citing the dangers of the mission and his concerns over how many kinks there are in their test flights. They go to bed at night as Pearl takes over the space program, working on her own to finish up the rocket with the scrap metal in the barn. Early the next morning, she wakes up Steven and offers to show him the ship she built, telling him that they can take a test flight that night. Steven agrees, hoping to keep this flight a secret from Greg, though the engines wake him up when they start to take off. Greg tries to tell Pearl to bring his son back, but she insists it won't be a long flight, only 50 years. All of her attempts to revisit her earlier days of exploring the galaxy have caused her not to consider the present or future. Pearl's too obsessed with the past to consider whether the humans she's showing that past to will even appreciate it if they're dead of old age by that point. It's a combination of missing the big picture as she focuses more on immediate goals, as well as missing out on the details due to focusing too much on her big picture dream of visiting space. The rocket ship begins to fall apart due to how quickly it was built, and Steven begs Pearl to turn around and stop. But she is too focused on flying to listen, so Steven opens the hatch and exposes himself to the vacuum of space, presumably still able to talk and breathe because he's half gem. They bail out of the ship just before it explodes, and they parachute to safety on the ground, as Steven convinces Pearl it's okay to stay on Earth because they'll stay together. Secret Team. While splashing around in the puddles inside of Amethyst's room, Steven pokes his head through one and into the burning room, freaked out when he sees Garnet in there. He then dives into a puddle where he enters Pearl's room and sees her with one of Rose Quartz's gems full of shards. Amethyst is excited to get Pearl in trouble for taking a bubble outside of the room, and Pearl tries defending herself as Steven intervenes to break up the fighting like always. But the three of them accidentally pop this bubble in their argument, and the gem shards crawl out in the form of several disembodied limbs. Pearl and Amethyst don't want Garnet to find out about the fact that they broke this, so they ask Steven to keep it a secret as they hunt down the shards, and Steven gives them all a fish stew pizza card that they use to form Secret Team. Secret Team then goes around the temple, capturing all of the miscellaneous gem shards with the power of teamwork as Steven just watches. Once they've collected them all, they ask Steven to re-bubble them, as his bubbles resemble rose quartzes, and they officially disband Secret Team without Garnet ever knowing. But Steven starts to regret the end of this era, wandering around, playing sleuth and alluding to old times while trying to fake mysteries for the others. When Pearl and Amethyst don't seem interested in needlessly rebuilding Secret Team, Steven turns to Garnet instead, coming clean about the shards and asking for her help in having a new Secret Team. He gives her a fish stew pizza card and they return to the temple, where Steven calls the others together while confessing that he alone let out the shards. Garnet is about to punish him when a hand arises from the water, grabbing her and fighting off the others. Pearl and Amethyst are overpowered by these hands and finally admit they were wrong to hide their actions from Garnet, and then Garnet puts the others down, saying she faked the attack to make them confess. Garnet encourages the others to tear up their pizza cards, as they ought to have no secrets and only one team, and then Steven laments that between them they could have gotten a free pizza. Island Adventure. The Crystal Gems return from a mission to an island where they failed to find a monster that was said to be lurking there. Steven volunteers to activate the warp pad for them and successfully returns them to the temple. Then he excitedly brags to Lars and Sadie that he is the warp master. But while trying to buy a celebratory donut, Sadie trips over a napping Lars and the two proceed to fight. Steven decides to use his warp powers to help them out, taking them to the temple and then to the island from before, so they can use their time there to have a nice vacation. Sadie thinks the island is nice, but Lars just looks around for a place where he can find a cell signal. And when the others decide to leave, Steven can't find the warp pad again, and they're stranded. They decide to simply wait it out until the Gems notice that Steven is missing, and begin searching for food and shelter. Lars isn't helpful at first, just wandering around with his phone, while Sadie starts catching fish with Steven, before eventually getting enough for food, and she tells Lars to cook because he hasn't done anything else. Lars is a surprisingly decent cook, and the three start to get along with one another, as Steven sings "Be Wherever You Are" over a montage of the three hunting and surviving over several days. Lars slowly comes around to spending time with the others, and soon they're all enjoying the island. But Sadie catches Lars on his phone despite all of this time passing, still trying to get a signal and get back home. Sadie is upset with this as she believed that Lars was finally starting to enjoy spending time with her and Steven, but Lars is being realistic, trying to go home to safety instead of spending time on an island that may or may not still have a monster lurking. She wants to chalk this up to him just being homesick, but the fact is that being stranded on an island is a bad situation. He was only spending time with her because it was the least bad option. They end up sharing a kiss, only to pull away when they realize Steven was still watching, and then their camp is destroyed by an invisible monster with a floating visible gem. They flee from the creature as Sadie's guilt overtakes her, and she leads the others to the warp pad, which she had merely hidden under a few leaves to force them to stay. Lars snaps at her for stranding them on purpose, and they begin to fight, with Sadie pushing Lars into the mud below when the monster corners him. She then jumps down and uses the techniques she learned from stabbing fish to defeat the gem, with Steven bubbling it afterwards. Lars begrudgingly compliments her fighting skills, still torn as she only solved a problem that she made in the first place. Keep Beach City weird. Steven, Amethyst, and Garnet are playing Steven Tag, shapeshifting into Steven when they're tagged, and Garnet wins by spiking a Steven-shaped amethyst into the sand. Afterwards, Steven is walking the beach when Ronaldo stops him, saying he's investigating mysterious holes that have shown up on the cliff nearby, and recruiting Steven as a fellow investigator to search for more strange mysteries around the city so Ronaldo can record them on his blog, Keep Beach City Weird. The two then wander around the city looking at other weird occurrences, but all of these are just residual damages caused by previous episodes. Ronaldo explains his unified theory that snake people, or Sneeple, are secretly controlling the world. Steven returns to the temple with the Sneeple information and tells the Gems all about it, but they point out that all of his mysteries have explanations and they were responsible for them. Most people who look for unifying conspiracies are really just looking for simple explanations to complex problems. More specifically, they're looking for simple solutions that they are helpless to influence on their own, absolving themselves of any responsibility and making the world a better place, while still making themselves feel important for discovering it. Steven breaks this news to Ronaldo, who is in the process of discovering that the mysterious crater he's been investigating was Steven and the Gems again. He leaves the beach in a depressed state, and Steven feels bad for breaking his heart. So to make him feel better, Steven dons a snake costume to trick Ronaldo into thinking he's a snurson. Then he gets knocked out by the guy, waking up inside the lighthouse where he's being interrogated. The crystal gems enter to rescue Steven, beating up Ronaldo before Steven breaks out and intervenes, telling them to stop as he reveals the ruse. Ronaldo's about to fall back into his earlier funk, but Petey is able to convince him to take another look, where he deduces it isn't snake people running the world, but shape-shifting rock people, and they're scheming to hollow out the planet for its resources. Fusion Cuisine. Connie gets a call from her parents asking to speak to Steven's mother, so they give the phone to Garnet to pretend to be her. Garnet gives a weird response and then hangs up, making Connie's mother grow concerned until she can meet Steven's parents in person over dinner. Connie explains that she told her mom and dad that Steven came from a nuclear family, with both parents present, and she doesn't want them to find out that she lied, or they might not let her hang out with him again. Steven tries to think about which of the 3 crystal gems he should bring along to pretend to be his mom, dismissing Garnet because she's too stoic, Amethyst for being too gross, and Pearl for not liking the sensation of eating. But then he gets the idea to have them fuse together and show up as a single entity. This fusion, Alexandrite, arrives at the restaurant being far too big to fit in any of the chairs, but she awkwardly attempts to communicate anyway. As they chat, Steven comes up with a series of lies, like how his parents met on a roller coaster and that Alexandrite works on an apple farm. Connie leaves to talk to Steven privately, chastising him for bringing a giant to dinner and coming up with weird stories, when Steven notices Connie is still wearing her glasses, despite the fact that he healed her vision. Steven concludes that Connie's ashamed to have him as her friend because she lied to her parents to make him seem more normal. She admits to lying for this reason, but says it has more to do with him being magical, and that might make her parents afraid of what could happen to their daughter should she spend time with him. Meanwhile, Alexandrite is fighting herself over the fact that Pearl has to pretend to eat, and they split up, falling to the ground and freaking out the Mahaswarans. Realizing they might not be able to be friends anymore, Steven and Connie run away, boarding a bus where they plan to live together on an apple farm with no parents. But a refused Alexandrite chases after them, catching the bus and yelling at Steven for running away. They return the kids to the restaurant where Garnet threatens Steven with no dinner for 1,000 years, but Pearl lowers the sentence to no TV for 1,000 years. This tough parenting impresses the equally tough Mahaswaran family, who decide that Steven's 1 or maybe 3 moms are actually good parents after all, and they allow their child to play with Steven again. Garnet's Universe. Garnet returns with a bubbled gem to an empty house, save for Steven, who dives from the ceiling to get her. Afterwards, he tries to guess where she was and comes up with an elaborate story where almost everything is borrowed from anime. This story is about Garnet's animal companions, Hopper, an analytical frog, and Hoppy, a reckless rabbit, who join her on a quest to find a gem artifact so she can return to Steven, her favorite person in the world. As the trio travels through the woods, they find the monk Ringo injured on the side of the road. After reviving him, he says that a fox stole the gem artifact from his temple and he needs their help to get it back. They travel to this temple and fight the fox, but with the gem's power, the fox is huge and muscular, punching out Garnet with ease. So at Hoppy's request, she decides to train to be stronger, meditating under a waterfall and using weighted gauntlets to raise her power level. Garnet then returns to the temple to fight the fox, beating him easily this time, and making way for Ringo to get the gem, where it's revealed the fox was the rightful owner and Ringo used Garnet to steal it for himself. Ringo transports them to the Ringo dimension, where his powers are stronger. So Garnet removes her weighted hair to raise the power level even further, so she can take out Ringo with the kick. After retrieving the gem again, she traps Ringo in his dimension and leaves the others behind to return home to Steven, having learned a lesson, or something like that. Steven asks if he was right about Garnet's day, and she says no. Watermelon Steven. Steven and Greg are having a watermelon seed spitting contest, which Steven wins with a spit technique. Which Steven wins with a spin technique. I guess they both work. But this leaves spit-covered seeds all over the ground. He wakes up the next morning to see that these seeds have grown into Steven-shaped watermelons that are covering the car wash's grounds, and he calls over the crystal gems to investigate. They mention Rose was able to create sentient plants that she used to defend herself, and Steven ought to have some similar powers, explaining the Watermelon Stevens. With no other idea on what to do with these melons, Steven takes them to the pier, where he sets up a table, giving a few melons away but selling the rest after Ronaldo promotes them with shouting. He sells out of watermelons save for the original baby melon, which is stolen by Onion. Steven chases him down only for it to come alive and jump out of Onion's arms. And this makes Steven realize he just gave away a bunch of his children. He tracks down the watermelons and gives everybody refunds, save for Ronaldo, who's intent on live streaming his dissection of one of the Steven melons. But when he tries this, the other melons rush him and begin to attack, so Steven takes the misbehaving melons with him back to the temple. The Crystal Gems are concerned that Steven's melons are too violent, so they decide to smash them all for people's safety. It's okay to show this amount of violence on TV because they're watermelons, so it's fruit, not blood. The melons start to overpower the gems though, as they outnumber them. Steven tries to get them to stop fighting, but the melons don't listen, so the original baby melon pushes Steven over. The other melons defend Steven by smashing one of their own, and he uses the guilt over this murder to tell the melons off. They walk dejectedly into the sunset as Steven eats the remains of his child. Lion 3. Straight to video. Steven is unsure what to buy at Big Donut when he notices bag lunches in the fridge, with Sadie explaining that her mom makes them for her, but she's embarrassed about being babied in this way. Steven takes one of these lunches with Sadie's permission and brings it home, wondering what kind of food his mom would have made for him if she were around. He falls asleep that night, dreaming that he's in a pink field where he can't breathe, before waking up to see that Lion fell asleep on his face, nearly suffocating him were it not for Pearl's intervention. Steven returns to sleep, resuming his usual dreams where Dog-Copter tells him about how art is meant to be honest and he should take a deep breath. Steven then appears back in the field, only to start suffocating again, waking up in Lion's mane. He tries to kick the lion out of the house, but can't resist a face it makes at him, rushing out to hug the creature when he appears inside the field once more, realizing this field is inside the lion's mane. He holds his breath and sticks his whole body in there, walking through a field to a tree where a few personal items are being stored, including a videotape he takes out with him. Steven rushes back to Big Donut, where the only other VHS player he knows of is around, and he asks Sadie to watch it with him. The two sit in front of the TV when the video starts, showing an older version of the Crystal Temple, as well as Greg sitting on the beach, trying various introductions for himself. Rose Quartz narrates the scene there, explaining how interesting every single human is before apologizing that she won't be there physically with Steven, but in another way instead. She is going to be half of Steven, and every time he loves himself is her loving him through her. The video cuts to a pregnant Rose next to Greg before turning to static as Sadie and Steven tear up together. Steven leaves to go home as Sadie picks up the phone, calling her mom and asking for more bagged lunches. Warp Tour. The Crystal Gems are returning from another mission, one where Steven was too incapacitated by allergies to do anything. A particularly powerful sneeze knocks him out of the warp, and he nearly leaves the beam, noticing something round flying through space as he's peeking out. Steven tries to warn the others about this, but they refuse to listen, assuming he was just imagining things due to his allergies. But Steven's convinced that he saw something, and that something might come through the warp pad at any moment, so he stakes out overnight to ensure he isn't caught off guard. The other gems keep casting doubt as to whether he actually saw anything, saying that they're the only ones on Earth who can use the warp pads. Steven suggests that something not of this world could be using them, and seeing that they're not getting to him, they decide to go on a warp tour to confirm there's nothing out of the ordinary. They arrive back at the Galaxy Warp where Steven's crying breakfast sticker has marked the central warp pad as being inactive, hoping this will put the issue to rest. But a sleep-deprived Steven only gets angry, saying they never do enough to humor his fears and suggest they're only trying to get him to stop complaining, rather than actually caring about whether or not he's comfortable. He continues staking out the warp pad that night when something falls from the sky, landing next to it, a tiny green orb. Steven's excited to be proven right, but the orb begins to attack him, crashing into the warp pad and breaking it during the fight. This orb then repairs the warp pad before jumping on and activating it, with Steven following. He ends up outside the warp beam once again after he grabs it, floating aimlessly until Garnet rescues him with a well-timed teleportation. The Crystal Gems are baffled by this orb before appearing at its destination, the Galaxy Warp. A bunch of orbs then work together to repair the pad, and somebody comes through, introduced as Peridot. She contacts someone else before noticing Steven's crying breakfast sticker, and she assumes the pad is compromised. Peridot then smashes the orb Steven was fighting with earlier before leaving, and the crystal gems begin to panic over the fact that other gems are beginning to come back to Earth. Alone Together. The crystal gems are trying to teach Steven dance moves in anticipation of him being able to fuse one day, but Steven's struggling to learn any of these honestly pretty sexually charged moves due to being a short child. In spite of his failure, they tell him it's fine because it can take years to properly learn how to fuse. He then goes to the beach with Connie, where he talks about the dance moves he was learning, and Connie says she's never danced in front of anybody before because of nerves. Steven offers to not watch her dance, and she begins to dance with him, as Steven's gem glows. They wake up on the beach wondering why their shoes are too small to fit when they notice not two people but one laying there, the two of them having successfully fused. This new fusion immediately goes to the Crystal Temple to show off their transformation. Fusions are the combination of both characters' personalities, and while Steven is already somebody we know who would want to show off gem-related advancements to the others, the fact that Connie would want this as well plays into the fact that she's been self-conscious of being boring and mundane for so long, that the ability to talk to the other gems about her newly discovered magic is something she would take pride in. Amethyst dubs this new fusion Stevani, and Pearl is concerned for their safety because Connie's not a gem, but Garnet is the most enthusiastic, telling them that fusion is a great thing and they need to go enjoy themselves. Stevani proceeds to splash around on the beach until they get tired, heading to Big Donut where both Lars and Sadie seem too flushed to charge for food. But Stevani is conflicted about continuing to stay fused, talking to themselves until being approached by Sour Cream, who invites them to a rave that night. Stevani goes to this party and starts to dance vividly, until seeing everybody else staring and being self-conscious again, before stopping. A man named Kevin approaches and offers to dance with them, but his dancing is too much for Stevani, who tries to get away, only to be cornered and offered to keep dancing. She re-enters the dance floor, but does more thrashing than dancing, eventually breaking apart. Kevin, showing some restraint, runs off once he realizes that Stevani was actually two kids, and then the two proceed to dance normally together. Fusion is essentially just shipping discourse, but with a tangible result that comes as a result in the form of a new character. To fuse means to combine two gems, or in this case two people, and form something that is at once new and also just like the old as well. Both people have their personality traits combined for better and for worse, like Connie being self-conscious about dancing in front of others, while Steven's not, resulting in a self-conscious person dancing in front of others. Yet while fused, they also get the chance to better understand one another by living out the other person's ideals as well as their own. So Connie can hate the idea of dancing, but then see and feel Steven's enthusiasm and take away a newfound acceptance of the fusion. Also, if gem fusion is meant to be read as a metaphor for a relationship, then Steven's actions in Giant Woman were kinda messed up. The Test. The gems are stuck inside on a rainy day, playing overly complicated board games, when Steven opens the closet to find the moon goddess statue from the Sea Shrine. He laments that he failed that mission so long ago and the tower collapsed because of him. But while the other gems are trying to cheer him up, Pearl lets slip that was just a test and not a real mission. Steven's upset that they gave him a fake mission rather than a proper one, and then insists that they give him a real trial next, so he can prove he really is ready. They agree, and the three of them create challenge rooms for Steven to face. The first is Amethyst's room, where he has to run down a long, sloped path as a boulder chases him, leaping a gap at the end and swinging across on a whip to exit. The next is Pearl's room, where he has to remember a pattern of lights on the floor, as well as some musical cues that create a stairway up, also having to dodge swinging axes once they descend from the ceiling. Third is Garnet's room, where Steven has to time his steps to avoid getting hit by lava spouts while also avoiding a falling spike trap. But then he fails at this, and one of the spike traps nearly hits him, stopping just short when he ducks. Steven realizes that this spike trap won't actually hurt him, nor does the fire, as it simply goes around where he's standing if he misses the timing. He backtracks through the other rooms, realizing the swinging axes simply phase through him, and the musical cues could have been done in any order. He also realizes the gap in Amethyst's room had an invisible floor, and the boulder always stops just short of him. He climbs all the way up the ramp to the roof of the challenge chambers, walking along the top where he sees the final room where the other gyms are waiting to congratulate him. They discuss that he's lost his confidence and his healing powers, so they fake the entire thing to encourage him, but they admit they're not entirely sure how to train Steven, as there's never been a gym-human hybrid. Steven retraces his steps through the puzzle chambers the right way, then enters the final room where the gyms are waiting. They give him a Neon Genesis Evangelion-style congratulations, as Steven pretends to have bought it, thanking them for what they did, as he recognizes the best thing they can do for him is their best. They're just as lost as he is, but they can at least be confused together. Future Vision. Steven is putting away all of his old toys, saying he's no longer a little boy, and he needs to replace his taste with slightly more mature ones. He slips on a ball coming down the stairs and lands in Garnet's arms, wondering how she always manages to be exactly where she needs to be. After a bit of prodding, Garnet explains that she can see possible futures, and Steven's amazed by the fact that she can see the future at all. After they do North Korea national gymnastics together, he asks if there are potential futures where they get breakfast, and then they go to Big Donut. There, Steven keeps asking about the consequences of mundane things, like getting nearly scorched by hot coffee that Garnet steps in the way of. Next, they go to collect some fry bits when Steven asks if there are any other nearby dangers, and Garnet proceeds to list off all the possible ways he could randomly die, which freaks out Steven so much he decides to avoid doing anything, only to learn this also puts him at risk. The gyms leave to go on another mission, leaving a helmet-clad Steven home alone as he panics over not having Garnet around to protect him from the myriad dangers in the house. She laughs it off, saying not to go on the roof before she leaves. That night, there's a rainstorm that blows against the house, terrifying Steven, who hides under the table with his old childhood toys. But the sight of them reminds him that he has to be braver and to face whatever it is on the roof Garnet warned him about. He stands up there, daring the storm to challenge him, when Garnet returns from the mission, telling them to get down. She says that the thing he was going to see up there was what was happening in that instant, the two having this conversation about her powers, as well as the fact that, although there is danger ahead, it's only one of millions of potential outcomes. Steven realizes that she can't really see the future, but some futures, and even with several possible combinations of events being able to happen, we still ultimately choose our own destinies. He climbs down to give Garnet a hug, and she deflects a lightning bolt headed for him. On the run. The Crystal Gems have returned from the hub with all the repair robots, intending to dissect and analyze them to prevent the warp pad from being repaired. They explain that it's important they are cut off from the home world due to something bad happening in the past that they refuse to tell Steven about. Steven's conclusion is that the Gems are like the the No Home Boys, a book series about two crime-solving vagrants he enjoys. He compares the Crystal Gems to those kids, but Pearl says it's not a great metaphor because Earth is their home. Amethyst doesn't think the same way though, and she and Steven convince each other that it would be a good idea to run away. They hitchhike out of Beach City and hop on a train during a montage, but as they're on this train, Steven realizes that being hungry and sleeping on hay bales isn't as comfortable as it sounded in his books. He asks Amethyst if they can go home. She agrees and takes Steven home, to her home. This home is a valley with large inactive bacteriophages that she refers to as the kindergarten, walking over to a hole in the wall that she calls hers. While Pearl and Garnet are from space, she was mass-produced on Earth with thousands of others. Pearl comes through the warp pad there, having been looking for Amethyst and Steven, and she tells Amethyst to come home. Amethyst is furious as Pearl's trying to hide so much about gym history from Steven, insinuating that the kindergarten was a bad place for bad gyms, and that Pearl and Garnet saved the world from people like Amethyst. She believes that the other gyms are embarrassed of her, that they refuse to talk about their history because it makes them look bad that she's a remnant of that history. As Pearl and Amethyst fight, it's revealed that keeping so much from Steven is something partially done out of shame, though when Pearl tries to say this isn't true, it only sounds more true. The fight ends when one of the drill bots nearly falls on them, with Steven shielding himself in Pearl as Amethyst retreats back to her hole. Steven still doesn't know the history of the kindergarten or anything else, and Amethyst says that if he did, he wouldn't want to talk to her anymore. But Pearl and Steven agree that that doesn't really matter, and if her history is as bad as she says it is, then she ought to be proud to have risen so much higher than where she started. Horror Club. Steven offers to take Lars to a spooky movie party, and he turns him down, until Steven gives the same offer to Sadie, and she accepts. This movie night is being hosted by Ronaldo, who has gone all out in preparing, with costumes and props and everything, but Lars mostly just makes fun of the excessiveness as they head inside. Ronaldo is unsure about Steven inviting Lars over, but Steven assures him it'll be fine. The four of them sit down to watch Evil Bear 2, with Sadie concerned it might be too much for Steven, who watches the movie from behind the couch. But then the power cuts out, and Ronaldo starts talking about how it has to be a ghost of some sort, asking the ghost for a signal as Lars tries to pretend it's nothing. They leave the upper room of the lighthouse by breaking down the door, with Ronaldo talking about how brave Sadie is acting, while Lars is watching in jealousy, trying to rush downstairs ahead of them and to the door, where the scarecrows from outside start to attack the group. Ronaldo then believes that there is a poltergeist, haunting not a location but an individual, and he accuses Lars of bringing it into the lighthouse. Lars tries to defend himself, telling Sadie, Steven, and Ronaldo are just playing a prank and that they should ditch the others, but Sadie steps away from him, only for the floor to swallow her up. Lars and Ronaldo both rush after the girl they were fighting over and into the basement, where they see Lars' name carved on the wall and pulsing. This confirms Ronaldo's theory, at least to him, and he tries to throw the guy into a giant mouth that's formed on the wall. But Steven, concerned because he feels pain from something down there, dives in after him. Steven manages to protect Lars in a bubble as Sadie bursts out of the ground, holding up a gem. Steven takes this gem and it projects a scene from the past. Ronaldo and Lars are setting up a secret club together, with Lars carving his name on the wall. But when the wall smacks him, Ronaldo takes a picture of it and says he's going to put it on the news, proof of a ghost in their clubhouse. Lars rips the photo up, not wanting to be embarrassed, and feeling betrayed that Ronaldo would give away their secret clubhouse like that. Ronaldo is furious at this, and Lars says he would care more about the way others perceived him if he knew what they were saying, just before the memory ends. Steven just feels some sympathy for the gem, having been trapped inside the walls for so long and feeling like it needed to defend itself, as Lars says he didn't mean to completely ruin the photo, just the part with his face. Steven and Sadie go home as Ronaldo and Lars joke together a bit. Winter forecast. Steven and Connie are roasting marshmallows indoors when the Maheswarrants call, telling Connie she needs to return home before the snowstorm settles in. Steven tries to stall her leaving with funny videos and such, but Garnet predicts that the snowstorm will be bad and kisses Steven on the forehead before asking him to make the right call. Steven begrudgingly leaves with Connie to go to Greg's car wash, but he decides to stall further by telling Greg that he can't wear his cherry sweater because the other family won't think it's a responsible adult outfit. They ask him to try on different outfits while they play in the snow, eventually settling on a garish outfit and agreeing to leave. But the snow is thick on the ground and the van eventually loses traction, with Greg asserting that the responsible thing to do is to get Connie home to her parents as soon as possible. They trek through the snow before finally arriving late at night to Connie's house, and her parents are furious because Connie was sick from the cold. Steven then gets entranced by the pattern on Greg's back and flashes back to the moment where the van first crashed. Greg says he's going to take the kids to Connie's house, but Steven convinces him it's a better idea to stay put where they're safe, rather than braving the storm. They proceed to eat snacks and play the guitar together when Connie gets a call from her father because he's on his way to pick them up. But due to driving poorly in the winter conditions and being distracted by his cell phone, he crashes into the van and Steven wakes back up at the car wash where his father's trying on new sweaters. He tells Greg not to waste his time, and Steven and Connie go on foot back to the temple, where the other gyms are in the middle of a rite involving the shooting star from Monster Buddies, meant to destroy the galaxy warp. The kids bursting into the room distracts Pearl and the star hits the ground, exploding as Steven wakes back up at the moment where Garnet kissed his forehead. He asks her what happened, and Garnet explains she temporarily gave Steven her future vision. He's reminded to make the right call again, and Steven immediately leaves for the car wash, then immediately leaves for the Maheswarran household, arriving just before the storm hits. The father compliments Greg's cherry sweater and invites him in to stay the night because they don't want a responsible adult to freeze in the storm. Steven and Connie then spend the night watching the snow pile up, just like Steven wanted to do at the start. Maximum capacity. New Year's is coming, and Steven's excited to spend the holiday watching fireworks with his dad. But the day before, they decide to organize his storage shed as a Greg standee won't fit inside, and Steven calls over Amethyst to help organize because she's great with messes due to her room being one big one. They begin sorting things into different boxes, but Amethyst mostly tries to keep everything in spite of Greg hoping to make at least some new room. They then come across the photo of Greg and Rose Quartz from Laser Light Cannon, but Greg doesn't get the time to think about this because they also find the Little Butler tapes from Steven's childhood. Steven is still grounded from TV, so he opts not to watch with the others, leaving to go to bed so they can start again the next morning. The next morning, Steven arrives to see that Greg and Amethyst are still watching together, having stayed up all night and not even doing a little bit of cleaning. Steven leaves to watch the New Year's fireworks with Pearl and Garnet, waiting for the others to show up. But when he tells them that Amethyst and Greg have begun watching Little Butler again, they assume the other two aren't going to make it in time, as they used to disappear for days at a time before. The fireworks go off and Greg still hasn't arrived, so Steven goes back to the storage shed where he and Amethyst are still watching old TV. Steven overhears Greg arguing with Amethyst over the fact that he missed New Year's Day with his son, but Amethyst wants him to stay with her as he's been neglecting to spend time with her for years. She begins to shapeshift, with Greg once more being uncomfortable seeing this, and once she turns into Rose Quartz, Steven interrupts. The next day, they return to the storage shed together only to see the crystal gems all working together under Pearl's leadership to reorganize everything, finally making real progress. Amethyst apologizes for her obsessive behavior the night before with a fixed-up picture of Greg and Rose together. Marble Madness. Connie is reading her favorite book series, The Spirit Morph Saga, out loud to Steven when there's a loud crash nearby. This is revealed as another of the marble robots from before, and the crystal gems dispatch it as Steven shields Connie from the debris. Connie's amazed by how cool it is to be around fights like this, but the gems are concerned as they still haven't quite figured out where these gems are coming from or what they're doing. Steven proceeds to read more of the Spirit Morph books, albeit out of order, as the gems are repeatedly called away to fight more and more of these marbles, which are appearing all over previously visited locations. Steven eventually follows them on one of these extermination missions, where he asks more about them, and the crystal gems confess that they honestly don't know anything about them and simply want them destroyed. Steven suggests that they follow his funky flow and observe the marbles, following them to its end destination. They reluctantly agree as they don't want to fight forever, and this marble uses the warp pad to appear at the kindergarten. Pearl wants to smash it then and there, but Steven holds her back, saying they still don't know what it wants with the location. The marble proceeds to dig into the ground and into a massive underground computer where Peridot appears on a screen, discussing how primitive the gem technology there is. The gems make a plan to sneak by and learn more, but Steven, who's frustrated with never being told anything directly by the others, simply walks up to the platform and asks her directly. Peridot at first is confused at Steven's presence, asking him about the dominant species on the planet before just trying to smush him. Pearl, Amethyst, and Garnet save Steven, and Peridot's baffled that there are still gems on Earth. They destroy Peridot's giant hands and sever her connection to the facility, praising Steven for figuring out what was going on, but also upset that they're now in much more danger than before. But it's hard to blame Steven for his personality. There's a lot of information that has only ever been implied thus far, and the rest has to be taken for granted. Everything Steven knows about the crystal gems and their homeworld, and so on, is something that he's learned by breaking rules or going where he shouldn't and talking to someone he shouldn't. And while there is something to be said for trusting in one's friend, there's also an idea that trust ought to be earned rather than taken for granted. Here, Steven does what he always does and innocently tries to learn more. This isn't viewed as a good thing or a bad thing, as he's betraying a trust that he maybe shouldn't have given so blindly, learning new information, but learning it at a great cost. Rose's Scabbard. The crystal gems are back at the battlefield where Pearl enthusiastically talks about how it was the site of Rose Quartz's stand against the gems of Homeworld, and they ought to gather some weapons there. Lion wanders off after a butterfly as Pearl scolds Steven for not taming this animal better, until Lion digs around and discovers Rose's Scabbard. Pearl mentions that this was the scabbard for the sword she used during the fighting, and that the two fought alongside each other back then. Upon returning home, Pearl offers to take Steven to a secret location only she and Rose know about. It's a lengthy hike and then a lengthy climb, but Pearl enthusiastically talks about how many secrets the two kept between them back in the day. They finally arrive at the armory from Lion 2 the movie, and Steven excitedly says he's been here before. Pearl is baffled, not only that Steven's been there before, but that he knows how to use all the equipment already, as well as the fact that someone else knows one of the secrets she thought only she and Rose knew of. So Pearl tells Steven about a mystery that not even she knows the answer to, the whereabouts of Pearl's sword. Except Steven used this sword a while back too, and he retrieves it from the lion's mane, where he fits it into the scabbard. Pearl grows furious at this as she thought that the relationship she had with Rose Quartz was unique because the two shared secrets with each other nobody else knew, and yet Steven has knowledge of not only these secrets but so many other things Pearl never even knew of, like the fact that Rose Quartz had a lion. She takes the sword and the scabbard and runs away with them. Steven follows her to the battlefield as Pearl continues to run away, with Steven slowly following after her, but failing because he isn't graceful enough to make the jumps. Pearl waits at the top of a cliff that Steven tries to jump to, but he comes up short, and she doesn't even bother trying to save him. Steven is able to climb up on his own though, a parallel to their climb to the armory from before, and he joins her on this overlook. Pearl projects an image of Rose Quartz with her, reliving a moment where Rose says they have to choose whether to fight, losing meaning death, but winning means never returning home. Because Pearl chose to stay, fight, and win, this means that she gave up everything to be with someone she loved, only for that person to leave anyway. But just like in Space Race, Steven says that she isn't alone because they still have each other. Open Book. Steven has finally finished reading the Spirit Morph saga, and Connie immediately asks him what he thought about the ending. She says she disliked it because the book was self-aware of existing tropes for so long, only to suddenly shift tonally at the ending for a sappy romance between the leads. Steven wishes he could give her a better ending, then remembers Rose's room when his gem starts to glow, heading inside where he can make everything he wants to come true. Steven wishes to be a falcon, like one of the characters. Then Connie wishes to be the protagonist, but the room only responds to Steven's wishes, so he instead wishes for a costume shop for Connie to pick out an outfit. He wishes that he could see the outfit Connie chose, and she steps out, revealing her take on what the protagonist ought to look like. Then they attempt to recreate their own ending, going from a wedding to something else. Steven wants the two to start a turkey leg cart together to raise money for the rebellion, but he realizes that this idea is kind of lacking, and he asks Connie for her input. She only tells Steven to do whatever he wants to, and so Steven conjures some guards, but he once again asks Connie for her input and she just defers to his ideas. Steven says he doesn't want her to do whatever he wants, and she starts freaking out, not knowing how to follow this command. Steven then realizes that he's not talking to Connie, but to a version of Connie that Rose's room made when he wanted to see her outfit. So Steven tries to leave to find her, but the fake Connie says that she is now trying to stop him from doing what he wants, and starts chasing after him. Steven does find the real Connie as the fake one catches up, and the fake Connie talks about how Steven doesn't want to tell the real one something, and she's going to make him. The real Connie attacks the fake version of herself a few times, but the fake Connie keeps coming back until Steven finally makes his confession. He actually liked the ending of the book and only pretended not to, so Connie wouldn't think less of him. Steven desired to change his opinions of the book series to be someone he wasn't, assuming that Connie would like this person more. He then gets to see this sort of relationship from the opposite side, getting to spend time with a version of Connie who constantly defers to his position instead of speaking her mind. For a while he's able to have fun, but inside of a room that gives him anything he wants to, and with a person who tries to do the same thing, life has no more conflict and he quickly becomes bored and unfulfilled. In the end, Steven is able to not only explain his position on the book series, but to justify it as well, even managing to partially sway Connie into seeing it his way. Shirt Club. Steven has made a Guitar Dad flyer for Greg's guitar lessons, and he shows it to the gyms. He then puts a few of these flyers on the wall of Big Donut when Lars' friend Buck arrives, seeing the poster and laughing at it as Steven tries to offer him one. Buck doesn't take the flyer, so Steven simply tapes it to his shirt, then Buck gets the idea to turn Guitar Dad into a t-shirt design. They go to the warehouse where Buck's dad, Mayor Dewey, has his campaign supplies, and the mayor shows off his shirt-making equipment as Steven finds an old "Vote for My Dad" poster that Buck made as a child. Steven and Buck make a bunch of t-shirts with Guitar Dad on them, and then try to decide how to release them in such a way as to make a bold statement. Steven gets his dad's t-shirt cannon to fire them at passers-by, most of whom like the shirts enough that they become a new fashion statement. Everybody is now wearing Guitar Dad shirts, talking about how hilarious the design is, but Steven is beginning to show doubts as people are mostly laughing at the design rather than actually coming to Greg's for guitar lessons. He asks Buck about this, and Buck all but admits that the whole thing is performance art, making fun of Steven's naivety and thinking that his drawing was good, confirming his fears. Steven goes to the Crystal Gyms to try to convince them to help him destroy the t-shirts because people are making fun of his dad for them. but they don't consider this to be an emergency, and they leave him to do this on his own. So Steven makes several copies of the Vote for My Dad design and fires them from a t-shirt cannon at Mayor Dewey during a speech. People begin to wear this design ironically rather than Steven's, causing Buck to realize how it feels for people to laugh at you. He then shows up at the car wash asking Guitar Dad for lessons, embracing the cringe instead of fearing it. Story for Steven. Steven and Greg are playing guitar together in the car wash when Steven finds an old photo of his dad with a man named Marty. Marty was his manager before he met Rose Quartz, and when Steven says he never knew this, Greg decides to tell the full story of how they met. Years ago, Greg was playing a one-man show in Beach City to an audience of 1, which is one more person than his usual turnout. This one person is Rose Quartz, who enjoyed his concert enough to talk to him after the show. He offers her a t-shirt, but realizing that she's very tall, goes to the van to get a bigger size, where Marty and a roadie come out, with Marty scolding Greg for giving merch away and never making money. Greg returns with the shirt but can't find Rose anywhere, so he runs down the beach searching for her when he encounters a shape-shifted amethyst. He continues onward to the temple, where he meets Pearl as well, and eventually Garnet, all of whom try to get rid of him, until Rose herself arrives and he finally gives her the t-shirt. He has to rush back to his van to continue the tour though, but he does offer to come back and sing for Rose one day in the future. Back in the van, Marty scolds Greg for trying to sing sappier songs about his new love rather than something more radio-friendly, even telling him off for not being a rich enough musician yet because he wants to keep living like they've made it, and he almost runs the van off the road. Greg kicks him out, returning to Beach City like he was told not to. There, he rushes back to Rose Quartz at the temple to perform for her like he promised, but she exits the room to tell him to leave as his lifespan's too short for them to be together, and she would only hold him back from his dreams. Greg says that his dream is to live with Rose, and she laughs, with Steven back in the present teasing his father for loving his mother as the story and the episode end. Slightly related, but I think this episode has my favorite justification for that trope where the main character wears the same outfit every single day by showing that Steven's shirts are just unsold merch from Greg's career. The message. Steven and Greg are playing guitar together on the beach, with Steven trying to set up the bass guitar by accidentally plugging it into the TV's audio jack. Greg corrects him and starts playing a song he recently wrote about that time the oceans went into space called Water Witch. But Steven dislikes that the lyrics make Lapis sound like the bad guy, as he believes she was just trying to get home, so he makes his own lyrics about how she was just misunderstood. Then there's a blaring sound that they think is their equipment bugging out, but it's actually coming from the temple. Steven heads to the temple as Greg stays behind because he doesn't like magical stuff. He sees the gems gathered around the Wailing Stone, the item that broke Steven's TV back in Rose's room, trying to figure out how to stop the noise. They attempt bubbling it and muffling it with cushions before trying to find where the signal's coming from, as every Wailing Stone on Earth has already been gathered. They conclude it must be an audio signal from space, and so they need an audio expert to convert the sound into something they can hear. They bring this Wailing Stone to the beach, where Greg is excited as the gems actually need his help, so he hooks up his audio equipment to the device and begins messing with the settings to find something more understandable. Greg is able to produce pleasant-sounding music until his van's battery is overloaded and the van breaks down, with nothing understandable coming through. The crystal gems return to the temple as Greg sits alone, lamenting with a song how he just wanted to be useful to them. Steven then gets the idea to hook up the Wailing Stone to the video output of the TV and try again, bringing the gems back to the beach, where he asks Greg to try once more. He hooks up his equipment and begins messing with the levels before an image finally comes through, one of Lapis pleading with the crystal gems not to fight back because gem technology has progressed so far in the years since Rose's rebellion that Earth won't stand a chance. She also tells him there's a gem already on her way, Peridot. The gems are distraught about this information, but Garnet gathers herself to thank Greg for getting the message through as a means of letting him feel useful. Political power. Pearl is testing a device that could potentially take out Peridot's robots when she arrives, but the shockwave it produces only knocks out power to Beach City, leaving the marble robot unaffected. The gyms decide to go back inside and try again the next day, but Steven's concerned because the power is still not back online. The next morning, it's still out, and Mayor Dewey is at the door, insinuating correctly that the gyms caused the outage and asking them to turn it back on so the residents don't start noticing how much weird stuff happens in town. Pearl assures him that the power will be back soon and leaves to focus on Peridot, but Steven promises he'll help the mayor out, and the two of them travel into Beach City. Inside the city, they walk around as Mayor Dewey tells the people that everything will be fine and the power will be restored before sundown, with Steven handing out glow sticks and buttons. Steven asks him how he plans to get the power back online, and Dewey says he has no idea. It's only his job to stop people from worrying, because if they worry, they'll go after one another. Steven feels concerned as there is no real solution, and Dewey's promising things will be okay, even though he doesn't know that for sure. Then he remembers that the gyms have been avoidant about their solutions to Peridot's impending invasion, trying to get Steven to play games instead of talking about their counterattack. The sun sets and an angry mob starts to form, furious the power's not back yet. Mayor Dewey tries to calm them down, but they flip his van and threaten more, until Steven climbs on top of it and asks if people really hate each other more than they love their microwave. The people calm down, realizing that Mayor Dewey only lied to them to make them feel better, but not forgiving the actions as they would have preferred honesty. Realizing the parallels to the Peridot situation, Steven asks the gyms to be honest with him about their plans, and they finally admit they don't have a plan, and they're scared. Steven finally gets the hard, uncomfortable answer he wanted, rather than a comforting lie. The Return. Steven is happily talking to Greg about the business with Peridot, but Greg is concerned for Steven's safety, asking if it's really all right for him to be involved in such dangerous business. Then they see a giant hand floating in the sky, headed towards Beach City. The crystal gems fire 4 laser light cannons at it, but the hand deflects the beams effortlessly. So Steven calls in a political favor from Mayor Dewey, convincing him to evacuate Beach City to keep people out of harm's way. He then joins the rest of the gyms in preparing for battle, only for Steven to notice that they're packing his things in Greg's van because they want him to evacuate too. Garnet convinces him this is because his role in the conflict is to assist in the evacuation and not to fight. As Steven and Greg are driving away, Greg mentions that this invasion isn't like the last one, accidentally letting Steven know that he, too, knows more about the situation than he's letting on. Greg explains that the gyms originally arrived on Earth as conquerors, and Rose Quartz led a rebellion against Homeworld to save the planet. The crystal gems now defend Earth as a way to ask for forgiveness. Steven hears about how his mother's shield was the only reason any of the gyms survived and tells Greg to turn the van around, eventually being thrown out when the airbag activates his shield. The town convoy stops to see if the universes are okay, and Steven tells Greg to go with them, while he returns home to protect the others, mounting Lion and riding there. On his way back, he tries to contact Connie to tell her about the giant hand, asking her to stay safe and then call him later on. Steven arrives back at the temple to see Opal failing to shoot the hand down, with the gyms horrified to see that he hasn't reached a safe place. But Steven refuses to let them fight alone, watching with the others as the hand arrives and 3 gyms step out. Lapis Lazuli, Peridot, and a new gym named Jasper. Jasper is dismissive of the remaining gyms, wondering why Rose Quartz isn't with them and ordering Peridot to open fire. But Steven blocks the laser with his shield, which is recognized as being Rose's, and Jasper changes plans to take Steven to Yellow Diamond instead. Garnet tries to protect the collapsed Steven but is taken out by Jasper's electric shock, splitting her in half. Jasper then knocks out Steven as the episode ends. Jailbreak. Steven wakes up in a cell blocked by an electric force field, though he quickly discovers he can walk past it with only a mild shock. He hears singing and investigates the origin of the noise, only to find a red gem in the cell next to him, freeing her by blocking the current for her. The two head deeper into the hallways, revealed as being the inside of the hand ship, now in orbit around the Earth, before they find Lapis Lazuli. Steven offers to free her too, but Lapis refuses, saying it's better if they comply so the gyms on Homeworld will go easy on them. He promises to return to her later after following the other gym. While trying to find her, Steven overhears Peridot and Jasper discussing their new plans, not to investigate something called the Cluster, but to take Rose Quartz back home instead. Steven then finds the source of the singing, a blue gem in another cell, and he frees her. The red and blue gems immediately reunite, hugging each other and fusing into Garnet, revealed to have been a fusion the whole time. This is one of those things that unfortunately was spoiled for me long before I ever watched Steven Universe. But to the show's credit, even if you know that Garnet is a fusion beforehand, there's enough subtle foreshadowing to make a first watch enjoyable anyway. Things like the door in the temple having 5 gems on it, 1 for each of the crystal gems, but 2 for Garnet, who opened it with both hands. This, and Garnet having a 3rd eye while most fusions have additional limbs and the like. Once Garnet is whole again, she tells Steven to go rescue the others and head to the control room as she has a rematch against Jasper. Jasper claims that fusion is a crutch for weak gems, but Garnet sings a song, Stronger Than You, something also not hard to have heard before because of the internet, a ballad to the relationship between Ruby and Sapphire, as she fights Jasper down to the ship's core, knocking her into it, which makes the ship crash. Peridot manages to escape in a pod as Steven tries to go back for Lapis, though there's no time and they collide with Beach City. Steven is amazed that Garnet was a fusion all along, but they don't get much time to discuss this when Jasper emerges from the rubble, looking for somebody to fuse with to be stronger. She finds Lapis and pressures her into fusing, saying it will be a good way to get revenge on the others. Lapis accepts, and for a moment it seems like the new fusion is about to fight them, until Lapis fully takes over, dragging them both into the ocean. In the end, Garnet mentions that those two are terrible for each other, reflecting the way that she, and I guess herself, are. Pronouns in this series are kind of confusing, what with singular pronouns for multiple individuals who are still technically one entity, but sometimes are not. A fusion is based on the strength of the relationship between the two gems, with stronger relationships forming a more effective fusion. This is why someone like Sugarlight can be defeated by Pearl, as she wasn't fully in control, or she wasn't fusing for a reason. And Lapis was able to sabotage the fusion she was a part of from within because she fused with someone who didn't really believe in fusing for anything non-functional, while trying to effectively capture a gem who was tired of being captured. Full disclosure. Full disclosure, and I'm not just making a pun on the episode's title. I accidentally watched this episode early because the 1A, 1B setup of the first season confused me. I finished season 1A, and then in my head thought to go straight to season 2. I saw this episode, I thought it was going to be like a flash-forward season opener, and all the random contextless shots would get explained later. The gems are still on the beach after Lapis's victory over Jasper when Steven gets a call from Connie asking about his voicemail from the last two-parter. He's about to explain what happened when Greg returns, asking if Steven's okay and then having a panic attack in his van because his son nearly died. Realizing that telling Connie the truth might just end up hurting her too, he puts off answering the phone until he can come up with the right words to tell her, something he does to a song with the same melody as his ringtone. Steven walks around the city, looking at all of the destruction caused by the battle and the livelihoods lost by the conflict, before surveying the situation from atop a hill where he meets Ronaldo. Ronaldo tells him that Mayor Dewey is calling the people of Beach City back to their homes, while also discussing how difficult it is to keep the truth from other people for their own safety. Ronaldo thinks he's discussing his knowledge of aliens and shape-shifting rocks, unaware he's correct, but Steven just compares this to the fact that the gems have kept so much about the invasion from him, and the fact that the crystal gems are seemingly anomalies of their species. Steven ultimately decides not to tell Connie about what happened for her protection, making the same decision that the gems made for him now that he understands why it's better to avoid some things you aren't ready for rather than dragging other people into it. But Connie arrives at the temple anyway, asking for Steven, who tries to sneak out. He hides in the crash site, telling Connie that they can't be friends anymore, but Connie refuses to break up over text and continues searching. She eventually finds Steven as he's declaring that they cannot be friends, but his face betrays his true intentions because he doesn't actually want them to stop spending time together. He's only afraid that she might end up hurt if they do. The people of Beach City arrive back in their homes, fully aware that being so close to the temple is dangerous, but not wanting to give up on something they love either. Joyride. Steven and the crystal gems are on the beach picking up the remains of the crashed ship as leaving it lying around is dangerous. Steven is approached by some of the cool kids from Beach City who see how stressed he looks and ask him to hang out with them. He turns them down at first as he has work to do, but that night they come back with pizza and ask him to hang out now that he's done cleaning for the day. They take a joyride outside of Beach City, where each of the kids explains the problems they have with their parents. Sour Cream wants to be a DJ, but his dad is pressuring him to be a fisherman. Buck wants to do his own thing, but his father controls his behavior because he's the mayor's son. and Jenny dislikes the burden of having a twin sister bugging her. Steven opens up about the fact that he's grounded from TV, and also that Earth-conquering aliens were trying to kidnap him because they thought he was his mom, which he sort of is, and also the crystal gems might be traitors to their kind and are being hunted down because of this. The cool kids have nothing to say to that, but they do see something glowing in the distance and drive over to investigate. This glowing was caused by Peridot's crashed ship. Steven wants to report its location to the gyms as soon as possible, but the other kids just throw some rocks at it while it lays there. Jenny then offers Steven a chance to take some selfies in front of it, and he agrees, reluctantly at first, but soon he's into it. Literally, he gets into it for a photo, where controls begin to appear, and Steven realizes he can pilot the pod. He then drives it around, racing the others and doing tricks until he accidentally fully closes the pod and it activates its defense systems, lasers blasting all around. The cool kids are afraid of this, but the crystal gems, having seen the explosion, investigate and see the pod attacking others. They're prepared to destroy it and even get a few close calls against Steven when Jenny steps in the way and they inform the crystal gems Steven is inside. They get him out of the pod and prepare to scold him, but the cool kids intervene again, saying that Steven deserves a chance to relax because he's just a child with far too much weight on his shoulders to bear. The crystal gems agree and take a few selfies with Steven in the pod after they unban him from TV. Say Uncle. Steven is unable to summon his shield on command, only managing to produce a bubble around himself. While wishing for a way to perfect his skills, he's approached by the silhouette of his mother rising from the sea, only for this to be revealed as a show by Uncle Grandpa, who's crossing over into Beach City for an episode. Don't worry, none of this is canon. After sinking Lars and Sadie's ship, he proceeds to put Steven's life in danger, only to get the attention of the crystal gems who are watching this stranger point lasers at Steven. Steven manages to defend himself, albeit only with the bubble again rather than the shield as they wanted. Uncle Grandpa introduces himself through a cutaway that is at once a representation of his powers, as well as happening literally, which disorients the gems who decide to chase after Uncle Grandpa for Steven's safety. Steven and Uncle Grandpa escape in a plot hole to the UGRV, where he introduces Pizza Steve, Giant Realistic Flying Tiger, and Mr. Gus. Pizza Steve is upset that there's a second Steven in the RV, but Mr. Gus is excited to meet Steven because he's a big fan of Steven Universe, like the show, even having his own gym Sona. Pizza Steve disguises himself as Pizza Steven to trick the gems, but only gets eaten by Amethyst, as Pearl becomes more and more neurotic before Garnet just smashes the fourth wall to get back to the beach. There, the crystal gems are ready to attack Uncle Grandpa during a tea party, but Steven jumps in the way, finally managing to produce his shield to defend someone else. Uncle Grandpa recounts Mr. Gus's explanation from before that Steven's powers are based on his mental state, and he's better at defending others than calling forth his powers for no reason. He gives a final good morning before flying off into the sky as he decides who to cross over with next. Love letters. Jamie, Beach City's original mailman, returns after an acting stint in Kansas because he missed being a mailman. While delivering a bunch of brine shrimp to Steven, he sees Garnet emerging from the water, having just returned from a mission to the bottom of the sea to search for lapis. Jamie is immediately smitten with her and runs off to write a love letter which he delivers to Steven the next day. Steven and Connie show Garnet this love letter, composed with flowery language, but because Garnet already is a relationship, not just in one, she dictates a reply telling Jamie no and little else. They try to bring this letter to Jamie as he's sitting by the beach watching the sky, but before they can deliver it, he talks to them about how many acting rejections he faced when traveling and how one more rejection might be too many. So they hastily rewrite Garnet's letter to be less direct and more in line with his metaphors before delivering. The next day, Jamie arrives back at the temple, having misinterpreted the fake letter from Garnet as affection, and he tries to confess to her in the rain. But Garnet hears this noise and tells him that she never wrote that reply, breaking Jamie's heart. Steven and Connie feel bad about what they did, but assume he'll be better in the morning, until a different postal worker delivers the mail that morning, saying how depressed Jamie looks. They go back to his beach-sitting spot to comfort him, with Garnet joining them to tell Jamie that relationships are built on trust and intimacy, so love at first sight like he felt is a myth. Reformed. Steven is trying to get others to take the "Which crying breakfast friend are you?" quiz, though Pearl and Greg are too busy fixing up the van to take it. So he goes inside and shows it to Amethyst, who proceeds to answer every question either sarcastically or by asking Steven what he thinks the right answer is. Then she sees Garnet inside of her room and they run in after her, where Garnet explains there is a slinker in her trash and Garnet keeps following it through tunnels that it's digging. Garnet keeps knocking over trash piles during the fight, with Amethyst getting upset over her things being pushed around until she is grabbed by the corrupted gem and poofed. Steven is distraught, but Garnet assures him that Amethyst never stays gone for long and very soon she's back to normal, only with feet instead of hands. Garnet chastises Amethyst for coming back too quickly instead of taking her time to reform, but Amethyst ignores her to continue chasing after the slinker until it grabs her again in one of the tunnels. Amethyst reforms again, this time a shape that more closely resembles Pearl, which she plays off by doing an impression of her. Garnet gets upset as her newer forms are less battle-ready, then Amethyst gets poofed again, coming back with one beefy trogdor arm. She begins to fight the slinker, but cannot maintain this form and practically deflates during the fight, getting poofed one more time. Steven takes her gem back to the temple, delaying their search for the corrupted gem to give her time to regenerate, as Steven wonders why she doesn't do anything for herself. Her last 3 forms were all things people were asking of her, whether it was coming back too quickly for Steven, looking more like Pearl when Garnet wanted her to act more like Pearl, or returning strong but out of control after being called weak. Ultimately, Amethyst does manage to reform after a few hours in a form more similar to her old appearance, just with a few changes that she decided on herself though. Sworn to the Sword. Steven and Connie are having a jam session on the temple, both in that they are playing their instruments together and also sharing jam. Seagulls try to steal Steven's bread, but Connie fends them off by swinging her bow around, which gives Steven the idea that Connie ought to take sword lessons because she wielded Rose's sword before. Pearl's at first hesitant to train Connie, but comes around to the idea when she hears her say that Earth is her home too, and she's tired of being a bystander during the fights. They head to the Sky Temple where Pearl begins Connie's training, though Steven's a bit nervous when he sees the hollow Pearl and tries to protect her in a bubble before leaving to observe from a distance. Pearl sings the song "Do It For Her," about the responsibility of a knight to protect their liege during a training montage, but through the lyrics it's clear that Pearl's singing less about Steven and more about rose quartz. Steven is at first supportive of Connie's sword training, but the more of it he sees, the more he realizes how much danger there is should she fight, and he raises these concerns to Garnet and Amethyst, who describe how Pearl used to constantly sacrifice herself for rose quartz during battles of the past. Steven is concerned that Pearl will push Connie too hard, especially after he watches a training battle where Connie is parroting mantras about how she's nothing without the person she has to protect, and Steven fears she might end up trying too hard to sacrifice herself. He dives into a cloud of fog produced by Pearl, where Connie saves him from a hollow Pearl and Steven saves her from a different one. The two declare that they're a team, and that one person is not more important than the other, and Pearl begins to scold them by saying that Steven's life is too valuable to risk, although she accidentally calls Steven by Rose's name during the lecture. They realize that Pearl's harsh training for Connie is just a front to feel better about risking everything to protect Rose, just to lose her anyway. But she realizes this too, and comes around to the idea of both of her pupils working together, just like she and Rose fought together in the past. Rising Tides, Crashing Skies. A mockumentary made by Ronaldo as he investigates the activities of the Crystal Gems in Beach City. It begins with him recapping the events of the previous season's finale from the perspective of an outsider, evacuating the town only to see the giant hand explode a few hours later. He interviews several of the people of Beach City about their experiences with and opinions of the Crystal Gems, but most of them simply acknowledge there's very little that they can do about the weird events going on. So Ronaldo goes to the temple personally to interview Steven, who says the aliens were not after humans, but the gems themselves, and that all of the destruction was both prevented by and caused by their presence. So Ronaldo asks them to leave the city alone, though Pearl points out that the Crystal Temple was there first, but Garnet agrees to pack up and leave, so they return. Later on, Ronaldo is celebrating that the day is saved, when Petey points out that with no crystal gems, there's nothing weird that will happen in the future, which will force Ronaldo to shut down his blog. He returns to the temple to ask the gems to stay, and Garnet agrees because she never actually intended to leave in the first place. The episode ends with the Crystal Gems watching the documentary online, and realizing they're the only view the video has. Keeping it together. The gyms are folding laundry together, something unusual because the entire chore wheel has become just Pearl overtaking other responsibilities. As they're folding, they discuss the potential plans of Peridot, suspecting that she may return to the kindergarten again to reactivate the facility, and explaining to Steven what goes on there. It's a location where gem shards are placed underground to incubate, and upon growing, begin sapping resources from the planet. They head out to the kindergarten to search the perimeter, where Steven finds Peridot in the middle of drilling into the ground. Pearl and Amethyst chase after her, but Steven and Garnet use the distraction to go back to the underground computer and look up what she was doing, realizing none of the injectors have reactivated, so their initial theory was wrong. They go underground where they see several chunks of dirt removed from the floor, with mutated mixtures of multicolored limbs falling out of them and attacking Garnet and Steven. Garnet freezes up at hearing these mixtures screaming in agony, thinking it's unnatural to force gems to fuse in that way. Garnet explains that fusion is something two gems do to create a form that's greater than the sum of its parts by taking the best traits of each one of the component pieces. Since this is a metaphor for a relationship, the implication behind forced fusions is clear, comparable to the worst aspects of eugenics or even a relationship where one person loses autonomy, as was implied to happen between Lapis and Jasper before. Garnet nearly defuses, but Steven's able to calm her down by shouting her name, enough that she poofs the gems and bubbles them to be safely stored at the temple. In the end, Peridot managed to get away from Amethyst and Pearl by using her detachable hands to fly, and they return the gem shards. The next day, Steven is doing his laundry on the hand from the opening, while discussing fusion with Garnet. There's something to be said for Steven doing a load of laundry on the hand of the temple, an image that's been present since the start of the series during the opening of every episode that only really gets attention called to it now. Here is a location of significance, and here are people doing mundane things on and inside of it. For as much importance as the mission the crystal gems perform have, at its core, Steven Universe's message never skips over the mundanity of people's lives surrounding it all. This was the thing that rose quartz saw in humanity before, a sentient gem from space falling for Greg, who's just some guy, not in spite of the fact that he's normal, but because of it. We need to talk. Steven and Connie are dancing to some of Greg's records when they begin to fuse into Stefani for a moment before awkwardly defusing. Greg's amazed, as he was unaware humans and gems could fuse together, but Connie's concerned he might tell her parents that she is involved in magic. Greg agrees to keep it a secret, as he's likely the only other human who gets fusion anyway, and Steven realizes that he's never heard the story of why, so Greg puts on a VHS tape to explain. On this tape, a younger Greg, Rose Quartz, Amethyst, and Garnet are playing for a music video for the song What Can I Do For You? Pearl watches the duet in jealousy, eventually walking over and offering to do a fusion dance with Rose to spice up the video, and they form Rainbow Quartz together. Greg is amazed at this new form, but Pearl tells him that the fact that he cannot fuse with Rose the same way means that they'll never have a real relationship, with Pearl saying that Greg's just a phase for her due to the short lifespan of humans. So Greg decides that he is going to fuse with Rose Quartz, watching the video again and again to learn the dance moves Pearl used in the fusion, when Garnet sees him attempting this and hears why. She tells him that to fuse doesn't mean dancing like Rose and Pearl, but dancing like Rose and Greg, so he sets up a different stage for the two of them, trying to woo Rose anew with a different kind of romantic dance. In spite of the way they feel about each other, they still don't fuse, although Garnet still seems convinced that it worked. And Greg finally admits his insecurities about the fact that he's a human and Rose is an alien. Back in the present, Greg finishes up the story by saying that, although they didn't fuse, they did still have a deep conversation, which is the point of the story. He then tells Connie that if she ever needs a human to talk to about being human and around gem stuff, she can ask him anything. Then Steven wonders about the fact that he technically isn't a human either. There's a trend in this episode about matters of identity, specifically in the fact that two people having an identity together leaves out everyone else. The way that Pearl and Rose fuse is something that can never work with Pearl and anyone else. The way that Connie and Greg connect over their adjacency to gem magic is something only they understand. And while this means that every single relationship between two people is unique, it also means that the others who love the participants can never feel what they feel, no matter how hard they try. Pearl can never love Rose the same way that Greg loves her, and Steven will never be loved the way others love each other. There is a loneliness in being unique. Chille Tid. The crystal gems are at sea, manually searching for malachite, the fusion of lapis and jasper. But it's late and Steven needs sleep, so they return home to rest, with Steven encouraging the others to join him by teaching them how to sleep during a slumber party. Garnet leaves and Steven teaches the others to sleep by example, resting his head and dreaming of himself being in an old sitcom where the crystal gems act out bits as he awaits Connie to take him to a dance. But then Lapis shows up at the front door with water coming out of her mouth before Steven wakes up in a panic because of the nightmare. He tries to explain the concept of a dream to the others, specifically that they don't make a lot of sense and describing one is always boring, proven when he causes Pearl and himself to fall asleep while recounting a different one. Steven appears flying through the sky with Dogcopter, attempting to ask him for an autograph before being eaten by Pearl, who then spits him out faster and into a void. Inside this void is Lapis, who begs Steven to stop bothering her because she needs to focus. Then Steven wakes up to the sound of Amethyst laughing at Pearl's projected dream about her and Rose Quartz surfing until Rose's head turns into Greg's. Steven warns them that he's had 2 dreams featuring Lapis and asks Pearl to describe her dream so he can fall asleep again, this time aware he's in a dream. Steven sees Lapis being held by chains, struggling to keep herself above the surface but getting distracted by Steven's presence. She sinks into the water and Jasper comes out, attacking Steven but being held back again until Lapis runs out of strength and Malachite takes over completely. Steven wakes up as Garnet returns, with Garnet saying they can't do anything about it yet and they ought to rest for real, teaching them by example how to sleep. If fusions represent the relationship between 2 gems, then it follows that they can be made out of relationships other than love and affection. Lapis and Jasper are fused out of their feelings of hatred, and this hate is the thing keeping them together. As one gives into rage, she loses herself and is controlled by another person, the one who is nothing but anger. Cry for help. Steven's Crying Breakfast Friends show is interrupted by a broadcasted distress beacon from Peridot that has also taken over every other station in town. Realizing the only way she could have gotten the power to make such a strong signal is to have repaired the communications hub from Coach Steven, they ride inside of Lion's Mane to reach it, as the warp pad is still destroyed. Amethyst asks if they can reform Sugarlight to destroy it again, but Garnet recalls the loss of control from back then, and still a little traumatized from the forced fusions before, decides to fuse with Pearl, so they can form an entity with more self-control, Sardonyx, who dresses like a performer. Pearl's excited about this transformation, though not as excited as Sardonyx herself, who proceeds to use a warhammer to carefully disassemble the tower piece by piece. The tower falls quickly and everyone celebrates, except for Amethyst, who watched the entire thing with sadness. The next day, Steven is watching Crying Breakfast Friends again when the signal is once more cut out and Peridot's distress beacon to Yellow Diamond continues. They all return to the communication hub to have Sardonyx put on an encore performance as Amethyst sings Tower of Mistakes about how she used to enjoy the feeling of strength that came with being a part of Sugarlight, only to hate watching another fusion go on without her. Realizing that Amethyst feels bad she isn't useful, Steven offers to go on a stakeout with her so they can catch and defeat Peridot on their own. They wait a while for Peridot to return, only to instead see Pearl climbing up and fixing it, then returning to the temple so that she can convince them to form Sardonyx again. Steven and Amethyst call her out for fixing up the tower just so she can feel the rush of fusing with Garnet again and again, and Garnet yells at her for this manipulation, fusing instead with Amethyst to take out the tower permanently. They return to the temple, though Pearl and Garnet are no longer on speaking terms, as Steven wishes that forgiveness was as easy in real life as it was in Crying Breakfast Friends. Garnet originally chose to fuse with Pearl because she wanted an additional degree of control instead of the impulsiveness that came from Amethyst, but Pearl ended up enjoying the rush of power from Garnet so much that she ignored her better senses to repair the tower and continue fusing. Relationships can be built on lies in this way, even if they do start with purer intentions like knocking down the tower. To trick a person into thinking they need you in their life is a pretty harsh betrayal of trust. And yet Pearl likely did this as she'd been dreaming all season of being useful to Rose Quartz or someone of the ilk again. Not really a justification, just a reason. Keystone Motel. Pearl has spent several days avoiding Garnet after last episode, claiming he's searching for Peridot. Greg enters, saying that he's taking Steven on a road trip to pick up some car wash tunnel brushes he bought online, and he invites anyone else who wants to go along. Garnet volunteers, and the three of them head to the Keystone State, which is not Pennsylvania, to stay at a motel. Once there, Greg leaves to pick up the brushes, as Steven stays with Garnet, who keeps talking to herself about forgiving Pearl before eventually splitting into Ruby and Sapphire. Ruby is hot-headed, literally burning a hole in the ground as she paces around yelling about how furious she was manipulated, but more specifically about how nonchalant Sapphire's acting regarding the fact that she just wants to move past the betrayal. Steven leaves to go to the pool and to talk to Ruby, who is upset at always having to be the bigger Jim in every argument, mad because her feelings of anger are not being treated as though they're serious enough to warrant a response. Her heat ends up evaporating the pool, so Steven goes inside with Sapphire, who's been slowly freezing the room as she waits. She explains that Ruby is wasting her time because she's already seen they'll forgive Pearl in the future and they just have to get over it. Greg returns with pizza, and Sapphire says Steven won't like it because it's a square, which he doesn't. But Greg says that one day Steven will appreciate all pizzas, regardless of shape, as he says that giving every Jim some space and time and breakfast will make them make up. The next morning they arrive at a diner to eat breakfast, though Ruby and Sapphire are still fighting over whether to immediately forgive Pearl and what it means that they haven't yet. Ruby ends up smashing the table and Steven storms out of the restaurant in anger. The two Jims go after him as Steven says he was hoping the road trip would help them to get away from the negative vibes at the temple, only for those vibes to travel with them. Then he wonders if it's his fault. Ruby and Sapphire finally realize that, although it isn't Steven's fault, they still hurt him when they argued. Sapphire too focused on the future to care about the present, while Ruby was too focused on the present to care about the future. They make up and refuse as Greg pays for the damaged table and food, before arriving back at the temple. Here, Garnet is still yet to forgive Pearl, but she's at least willing to talk to her now. Onion Friend. Steven is preparing lunch for himself, trying to figure out the last bit of garnish when he sees Onion inside of a cabinet, stealing a bag of chips and running away. Steven chases this kid back to his house, where he enters through a tarp in the garage, only to see a collection of artwork, all featuring Amethyst. So Steven returns to the temple, where Amethyst has been sulking due to the ongoing argument between Pearl and Garnet, where he brings her to this garage, only for Vidalia to attempt to chase them off, only to see Amethyst and greet her like an old friend. Vidalia explains that she and Amethyst used to be very close friends prior to having kids, Steven and Sour Cream/Onion, and she invites them in for lunch because Steven's was stolen. She explains a bit about how much her life has changed since getting married, while Amethyst is basically the same as she's always been. They want to keep talking, so they ask Steven to spend some time alone with Onion as they get privacy, with Sour Cream playing loud music in his room by himself. Steven is weirded out by Onion's behavior, like trying to get him to feed a mouse to his pet snake, and watching a video of his birth, before Onion tries to get Steven to crawl into a hidden passageway in the walls. Steven taps out of there and heads back into the living room, where he sees Amethyst and Vidalia talking about how lost Amethyst is, with her other friends all arguing with each other. Vidalia mentions how in the past, Amethyst used to let stuff like this pass over and rarely cared about what was going on around her, and that she even looked up to her for this. Things for Amethyst have changed, though. Vidalia is given credit for also not caring about what's going on around her, which manifests in her family constantly fighting one another as Onion robs people and Sour Cream shuts off the power with the demand for his DJ booth. Amethyst, on the other hand, used to be like her, but is slowly coming around to caring more about her friends, to the point that their issues are her issues too. Realizing how important this conversation is to Amethyst, Steven goes back into Onion's room to tolerate him a bit longer, crawling into the mystery hole and coming out in a shrine of sorts to a chest full of guys. Onion offers Steven one of the rare Gals figurines for spending time with him, and they finally leave, with Amethyst inviting Vidalia and Onion to the temple someday. Historical friction. Jamie shows Steven the script for a play he's putting on about the history of Beach City, funded by Mayor Dewey, with the script also written by Mayor Dewey and the story about an ancestor of Mayor Dewey who founded Beach City. This story tells about how Captain Dewey was a perfect individual whose crew loved him unconditionally, and also he could grow to 50 feet tall and carry the ship to safety. Jamie dislikes this script because it makes the main character seem too perfect. And Steven also realizes the same thing during a conversation with Pearl about how people only look up to characters because of the struggles they go through, not their lack of flaws. He even cheers Pearl up a bit by saying that her flaws recently, like the events of Cry for Help, make her into a better person because she's persisting. Pearl points out that she knew Captain Dewey personally, and the story didn't happen that way, offering to rewrite the script to be more historically accurate. Jamie prefers the new version of the script, but he's worried about performing this version because he's convinced they would get their funding pulled from future shows. Steven convinces him it's worth taking the risk because that's what good characters do, and they agree. The new version of the play features a cowardly Captain Dewey who was kicked out of his home country for being disliked and is always messing things up. The Crystal Gems met him at sea and told him to turn around because the way forward was dangerous, but he continued onward anyway, only for the ship to be attacked by a monster. This monster is driven away by a gem resembling the statue behind the temple, and Dewey declares that he is going to settle there anyway because he isn't afraid of risk. Dewey is furious at these changes, but the crowd loves them, cheering for their mayor for his relationship to a relatable hero. Dewey approves more funding for a Beach City community theater, and Steven ends the episode on a joke, because that's what audiences like. Friendship. The Crystal Gems have come up with a way to track Peridot using her escape pod to link her warp signature, ambushing her at a warp hub and preparing to capture her. In spite of Steven knocking her around with a generated shield, Peridot still manages to escape by flying off after Pearl and Garnet run into each other while trying to catch her. They return to the temple, with Pearl immediately trying to get back to work on catching Peridot the next time she warps. But Garnet doesn't respond to this news at all, with Amethyst trying to get them to just talk out their issues, Pearl trying to ignore the tension and assuming that Peridot will end their argument, while Garnet refuses to speak at all. They get a ping with Peridot's location and ignore the argument to head there, the site of an old crashed gem ship they used to use before setting up the warp pads. They anticipate trapping Peridot inside and head in there, only for Peridot to reveal that it was a trap, sealing them inside of the ship and firing a bunch of lasers at them. Steven exhausts himself making yet another shield to protect them as they head further inside for cover, chased by spikes until they finally find a hologram of Peridot that Pearl attacks, before realizing she's been trying so hard to catch the gem, she fell for an obvious trap. The floor opens up, with Amethyst catching Steven before he falls even further, but Pearl and Garnet wind up in a tiny room together as the ceiling shuts on them. Amethyst and Steven try to come up with a way to get them out, but they see on a screen that the two are talking about the issues between them and that this trap might finally get them to stop their argument. The walls begin to close in on them, figuratively and literally pushing them together, as Pearl confesses that she only ever wanted to fuse because she feels useless without some kind of strength. But Garnet reveals that she literally fell apart from the incident, and that she has flaws she simply covers up to protect the others due to her status as leader. With this, the two finally realize that the only way to escape is with the fusion, and this time Pearl asks for explicit permission before they form sardonyx and burst out of the floor. The Crystal Gems work together to make a chain to catch Peridot before she can fly off, but she simply ejects her foot to make an escape, with the Gems saying they'll get more of her next time. Nightmare Hospital. Steven and Connie return from another sword practice, with Connie wishing she could practice more on her own. So Steven offers her his mother's sword to continue improving, only for Miss Maheswaran to return home from the hospital at that moment, discovering this poorly hidden sword in the living room. She confiscates it because she doesn't want her daughter playing with swords, then gets called back to work, leaving with it. Steven and Connie follow her to work, riding Lion there so they can try and negotiate for its return by changing Miss Maheswaran's mind. They watch her enter the building and begin working on a patient they found on the side of the road, trying to take its vitals but finding nothing. She then catches Steven and Connie in the middle of trying to take the sword and is furious that her daughter won't listen to her. But before Steven and Connie can explain, they get attacked by a gem cluster full of way too many limbs. Worse is that the patient they're in the room with is also a cluster, and it starts attacking them as well. Steven holds off the monster with a shield as Connie tries to get the sword from her mom, but Miss Maheswaran refuses to hand it over, saying that she knows better than to let her daughter wield a weapon. They try to flee but are surrounded, with Steven forming a bubble around the three of them for protection. Here, Connie finally tells her mother that her glasses are fake, and they've been fake for a year. Miss Maheswaran realizes that she doesn't know her daughter as well as she thinks she does, and Steven drops the bubble as Connie poofs both clusters with ease, while Steven bubbles them back to the temple. Outside the hospital, they talk about how Connie's mother was only enforcing so many rules to protect her daughter, but you can't really protect a child if the child doesn't feel comfortable telling you the truth about themselves. Steven sees the scene between the mother and child and holds onto the sword, lamenting that his mother's not there. Sadie's Song. Steven is handing out flyers for the Beach-a-Palooza when he hears Sadie singing while restocking the bag of Big Donut. Amazed that she can sing so well, Steven suggests that she sign up for the Beach-a-Palooza to sing there, as everyone else in town is doing it too. And although she's hesitant to sing in front of others at first, she comes around to the idea and invites Steven to her house to work on a routine. But as they're planning things, Sadie's mother comes home and learns from Steven what they're up to, offering her help as well as the two raid Sadie's closet to look through all her old outfits and hobbies. Steven and Sadie's mom then work together on a makeover for Sadie through a montage of making her practice dancing in anticipation of the big night. But before she officially signs up, Sadie says she would rather not have her name on the list, something Steven interprets as signing her up as a mystery guest. The night of the Beach-a-Palooza comes, and most of the town puts on various acts, from miming to stand-up to a conspiracy rant. But when it's time for Sadie to go on stage as the big mystery guest, she gets more and more nervous before eventually dunking her head in the water and washing off the makeup. She says she never wanted to perform as a mystery guest, and her mother's too enthusiastic about being supportive to the point of taking over all of her interests, that she can't even point out something fun without it being a big deal. Because there's still a big mystery guest who has to perform, Steven goes out and sings Sadie's song for her, and the next day Sadie returns to singing casually. Catch and Release. Steven is grabbed out of his bedroom by Peridot, who takes him to the warp hub to repair it so she can get off of Earth. He agrees to fix it for her, but his spit doesn't do anything, and the pad remains busted. Peridot breaks down, saying that kidnapping Steven was her last plan to escape, and now she's out of options, and short one foot. Then the crystal gems, after Steven, arrive at the hub to rescue him and fight Peridot one more time, this time even managing to grab her, though not before she starts shouting something about what she knows. Garnet dismisses her words as desperation as Amethyst tosses her limbs into the water, and they return to the temple with Peridot finally bubbled away. But Steven's unsure about the fact that they bubbled Peridot before she could finish talking, so he goes to the basement to find her bubble and free her. Peridot's at first terrified that she's going to be harvested and attempts to fight back, only to realize that all her weapons and limb extenders are gone. Instead of fighting, she explains why she was sent to Earth in the first place, checking up on the cluster, which will soon destroy everything, something that was supposed to be a quick mission. She then slap fights with Steven before escaping, running away and straight into the temple where the other gems quickly start to fight her, but Steven stops them from attacking, giving Peridot enough time to barricade herself in the bathroom. They realize that she does have useful information and they cannot simply bubble her again, so they reluctantly allow Peridot to stay in the bathroom until she cooperates. Steven's able to bribe his way inside by returning her foot, and for a while the two are able to talk somewhat normally about what life is like on Earth. Steven, as usual, has an innocent demeanor to him that drops the guard of a lot of the enemies the crystal gems face. When you approach someone with a weapon drawn, they're far less likely to cooperate than they are to defend themselves. Steven always tries to talk first and only uses his powers to defend himself, the shield representing that. And as such, he tends to get a lot more information out of people than the other crystal gems do. The gems tend to assume they know everything they need to know, but Steven doesn't know these things and tends to learn a lot of uncomfortable truths as a result, though it's better to know of danger before it comes than to be taken off guard. When it rains. Peridot is still barricaded inside of the bathroom, with the crystal gems failing to get her to crack and telling them everything she knows about the cluster. They need to leave on a mission, so they leave Steven behind to watch after her, giving a quick goodbye before leaving the two alone. Steven begins making soup as a rainstorm comes in, and when lightning strikes, Peridot rushes out of the bathroom, fearful that the cluster has arrived. Steven explains that the noise was just lightning, and then he uses the evaporation from his soup to explain how rain clouds work. Peridot laments that she doesn't know anything now that her limb extensions are gone because they contain screens that would have taught her this. Steven invites Peridot out into the rain to show her it's harmless, trying to use first-hand experience to show her the Earth rather than having her learn about it through a screen. After they head back inside, Peridot agrees to show Steven the information she knows about the cluster by taking him directly to the kindergarten, so he too gets to have first-hand experience of what's really underneath the Earth. This is revealed as a project that Homeworld began work on after the Rebellion, a giant forced fusion similar to the corruptions they've been fighting before, and that once it's fully grown, it'll burst out of the ground, destroying the planet. But Peridot is confident, saying that Steven's knowledge of Earth might be enough to save it, but Steven admits he has limited knowledge and mostly learns things from his dad. Then they get attacked by some fusions, with Steven unable to do anything but make a bubble, while Peridot can't do anything at all without her tools. They wind up cornered when the crystal gems arrive and save the two, chastising Steven for letting Peridot out. But Peridot's internalized Steven's message by this point, that it's impossible for them to save the Earth alone and they need the help of other people. So just like the crystal gems helped fight for Steven and Peridot, Peridot agrees to tell them what she knows, so they can fight together again. Back to the barn. Peridot teaches the others about the cluster, a giant fusion at the center of the Earth that could take form any moment, destroying the planet while it does so. Pearl suggests that they build a giant drill to confront it at the center of the Earth, but Peridot dismisses this plan, instead suggesting that they build a giant drill to confront it at the center of the Earth. She breaks Steven's TV looking for parts for the machine, but he suggests they go to the barn to get materials instead. Upon arriving, Pearl draws up an idea for the drill that they'll create, but Peridot dismisses this idea, saying that a Pearl is incapable of coming up with anything good, as they're just meant to serve others. As it turns out, Pearls are mass-produced servants to other gems, kept more like accessories than as a real being. This ties into how Pearl has felt lost without Rose Quartz around. She was literally built to serve others, and with no one to serve but herself, has no actual purpose but what she makes. Steven suggests that Peridot and Pearl have a robot building contest to see who the better designer is, with the winner leading the project. They both quickly assemble robots that fit their design philosophies, Pearl making a slim, graceful robot, while Peridot makes something tougher and stronger. They make a series of arbitrary competitions that Steven judges, ultimately winding up after a montage in a tie. Pearl accepts this outcome and agrees to cooperate equally, but Peridot refuses, challenging her to a fight as a tiebreaker. The other crystal gems cheer on Pearl, but she ends up getting overpowered and losing the fight. Peridot begins to celebrate, but no one celebrates with her. Instead, they congratulate Pearl for a job well done because there are things more important than winning. Peridot gets to lead the construction, but would have to do it alone, and save for her attempts at the end of the episode to join in with the congratulations and make her peace with the others. Too far. The crystal gems have begun work on their drill, with Peridot begrudgingly allowing Pearl to lead the design team for its head. Peridot tries to convince Garnet to defuse and is leased to a fence post as a result, struggling to do any work until Steven and Amethyst approach after failing to assist Pearl due to their lack of technical knowledge. When Peridot suggests that they use one of the injectors from the kindergarten as the drill bit, the three of them are sent away on that mission, partially to keep an eye on Peridot while she's away. Once there, Peridot realizes that Amethyst considers her lack of knowledge about Earth and the names of things to be funny, as well as the fact that she is talented at making fun of others. Peridot makes fun of Garnet for always being fused even outside of combat, and she makes fun of Pearl for being a servant with no one to serve, and she makes fun of Steven for having a human half. But when she turns to make fun of Amethyst, she touches on her insecurity at coming from the kindergarten, specifically the fact that Amethyst is too small to be a quartz due to her hole being too low to the ground and too small to have been released at the right time. Amethyst is upset at these jokes and wraps up the mission, with Peridot not understanding why Amethyst is no longer talking to her. They continue working on the drill when Peridot accidentally activates it early, rushing towards an unaware Amethyst. She rescues Amethyst and Steven's able to disable the drill, later approaching her happy she is safe. Steven then encourages Peridot to apologize, something she's unable to do directly, having to use a pre-recorded log instead, where she admits that she is new to Earth and doesn't understand social graces enough to avoid saying hurtful things. The answer. It is midnight on Steven's birthday, and Garnet agrees to finally tell him that she's a fusion, which he already knows. But she also intends to tell him the story of how Sapphire and Ruby met, which he doesn't. This story begins on Earth 5,750 years ago, while a group of rebels, the Crystal Gems, were actively hindering the colonization efforts of Earth. They dispatched Sapphire as a diplomat to the planet, as well as 3 Ruby bodyguards who can fuse into a larger Ruby. Sapphire predicts that the rebels will attack them, poof several gems, and then be captured. As predicted, the rebels arrive, Rose Quartz and Pearl, and they proceed to fight exactly as Sapphire predicted. But what Sapphire did not predict was a Ruby jumping in the way, tackling her to safety, and then the two fusing together. The court is appalled by this, as it's considered not only wrong for 2 gems of different types to fuse, but the fact that a lowly Ruby was even interacting directly with a member of the Royal Court of Blue Diamond in the first place. Between this and previous episodes revealing the prejudice Peridot had towards pearls, Blue Diamond even has a pearl of her own, and the pearl we see is referred to as roses, there are underlying class structures to gem society. The fact that this is a surprise to the viewers means that this is a class structure that has ceased to exist on Earth. Pink Diamond even recognizes this, and calls off the attack when she sees the newly formed Garnet, another thing Sapphire couldn't predict. Sapphire and Ruby are yelled at by the gathered crowd of gems, so they leap down to Earth to escape. Something the episode does here that's neat is changing the art style of the flashback from crude outlines of gems and geometry to a more lush and vivid environment, as if nothing before that moment was worth remembering well. Sapphire is amazed that she can't predict the future with Ruby, while Ruby is impressed that Sapphire would continue a mission even at the cost of her own life. They spend more time on Earth, singing Something Entirely New, which reuses bits of melody from Stronger Than You, before fusing once again. After fusing, Garnet meets with Rose Quartz, who seems to be more interested in this new fusion than herself, and Garnet joins with the rebellion because her love is accepted there. Steven's birthday. It's Steven's birthday party, and the Crystal Gems minus Peridot have taken a break from construction to help him celebrate. Greg arrives with Connie to officially start the party with several of the same traditions they've always had. But as Greg is reminiscing on Steven's past birthdays, he realizes that his son hasn't really grown in several years. He and Connie have another human talk in private about how Steven might not grow the same way as the rest of them because he's part gem. But Steven overhears this conversation and begins to feel self-conscious about the fact that he's so short and might be that way forever. So before the party begins in earnest, he uses a moment of privacy to force himself to grow a bit, like he did back in Too Many Birthdays, now becoming a proper adolescent. Steven's physical appearance reflects his mental state just as much as the rest of his powers do, and he isn't alone in this, as we saw Amethyst recreating herself in the past based on the expectations people had for her. Steven's never really been expected to grow up, as the gems have kept things from him for so long while he's been living with them, and only recently has he ever really been expected to hold his own due to instances like the cluster and arrival of Peridot and Jasper forcing him to grow up. So in his mind, he's a child, and so he looks like one. But now that there's this expectation that he should have grown older, the last few years of coasting along are called into question. Of course, growing up suddenly has a few issues, not just small ones like not fitting into the gifts Connie gave him, but the fact that holding his appearance as an older person is something he has to consciously do. Amethyst and Greg catch him shrinking back to his normal size, and Amethyst warns him about the dangers of maintaining a form that isn't his true one. A metaphor not just for gem powers, but anybody trying to lie about who they are. Gem powers are a metaphor for a person's mental state, and here, the metaphor is reversed. Steven spends so much energy pretending to be somebody that he's not, he ends up overcorrecting and exhaustion, reverting to the form of a baby and ending the party. Greg takes Steven for a drive, as that's what used to calm him down when he was a baby before, but Connie insists on coming along on this drive as she still wants to be there for Steven, whether he's a baby, or a child, or an awkward teen. They return to the barn where Steven finally takes on a comfortable form, not as short as he was before, but still noticeably older. He is at last a combination of what he thinks of himself and how others view him, but more importantly, he's still Steven, who he was all along. It could have been great. The gyms are relaxing, enjoying the view after a long day of construction on the drill. Peridot's confused as to why they aren't continuing to work, viewing their time staring at the sunset as wasted, since they could have been productive. Steven tries to convince her that life isn't about productivity, but about taking time to appreciate small things as well. And soon, Peridot is singing along to Peace and Love on Planet Earth. She makes up her own lyrics about how the crystal gems are all crazy, but she feels the same way and is glad they're working together. Soon, the drill is completed, and the only thing needed to finish the mission are the exact coordinates of the cluster. Pearl suggests that they could find the locations on a terminal located on the moon, so Steven asks Lion to portal them there, which he does at great strain. After playing around with low gravity that only affects him, Steven and the others inspect the inscriptions on the wall. As Peridot excitedly explains, they're images of the diamonds, the leaders of the gems that they were made to serve, though the rest of the crystal gems understandably don't like this explanation, as they don't serve anyone anymore. They make their way to the top of the spire, where Peridot's upset at the lack of respect they're showing for the artifacts up there, saying they're not high-ranking enough to touch anything, though eventually coming around to sitting on the throne when Steven invites her up. Peridot pulls up the schematics of the Earth, discovering the exact location of the cluster, while also showing what exactly the original plans for the planet were, a colony of gems where they could expand the Empire. Peridot excitedly shows off the potential of the planet, though the gems hate the idea as it means all other life on Earth is eliminated, something Peridot doesn't really understand. This mimics her mentality at the start of the episode. Peridot doesn't get why the others are sitting around watching the sunset instead of working, and she doesn't get why they wouldn't want their planet turned into a giant factory for gem kind. The purpose of life to the homeworld gems is to expand and exploit, while the purpose of life to the gems of Earth is to enjoy and thrive in their time. They've been defending the Earth not because the planet has a bunch of resources, but because it represents something greater, the idea that we're not just meant to survive, but to thrive. Message received. Steven confronts Peridot about the fact that she took a diamond-shaped device from the spire in the previous episode, asking her a bit about the diamonds and her loyalty to them. Peridot fawns over Yellow Diamond, saying that she's loyal to her because of the diamond's superiority. So Steven takes the device from her and locks her inside of a car in the barn. He takes the device to the crystal gems, identified as a communicator that Peridot wanted to use to contact Homeworld. They're appalled by this, but Steven's hurt most of all. He extended his trust to Peridot even though she was an enemy, believing that there was some good deep down in each person. The other gems merely compare Steven to his mother, someone who also saw the best in everybody and always tried to extend them help and trust. Garnet explains that not everyone is deserving of this trust, but it's still the right thing to do to give them kindness anyway, because the alternative just means hating strangers. Peridot escapes from a captivity inside of the robot from back to the barn, grabbing the diamond communicator and running away while trying to activate it. The crystal gems tell Steven to pout later as they chase her down to prevent contact with Homeworld by hopping into an amethyst helicopter. They catch up to Peridot and shut off the robot, though she escapes through the arm and activates the communicator, finally getting to speak directly with Yellow Diamond. The gems hide from sight so as not to be discovered. Yellow Diamond is at first dismissive of Peridot, chastising her for crashing the ship and being behind schedule, though she's at least pleased that the cluster is on schedule. But then Peridot explains that she doesn't think the Earth is worth destroying, that there are unique things on the planet that shouldn't be destroyed for just another colony. Yellow Diamond refuses to hear this out, telling Peridot to obey authority, to which Peridot calls her a clod who doesn't know anything about the planet she wants to destroy. Yellow Diamond detonates the communicator, which Steven bubbles as Garnet punches it to a safe distance, and as they sit beneath the explosion, they welcome Peridot not as a traitor to the homeworld, but as a crystal gem. Through the last season, Peridot has frequently seen that all of the things she is told are normal on Homeworld are different on Earth. The Pearl is an independent thinker, fusions can be made in any way that's comfortable, and they sit back and enjoy life instead of mindlessly serving their superiors. Her life on Earth has been more enjoyable than a life of servitude to a group of matriarchs, and getting to experience what she left once again has made her realize the difference between surviving and thriving. She stands up for herself, for her right to stand up for herself. The first of many things she gets to do instead of has to do. Log date 7152. Peridot is breaking down over the fact that she told off Yellow Diamond, panicking because she's a traitor, but also excited to be a crystal gem, while also not understanding what the future will hold. She records her thoughts in a tape recorder Steven gave to her, but as she can't deal with it at the moment, she gets rid of the recorder to be elsewhere. Out of curiosity, Steven takes this tape recorder and listens to Peridot's various logs, starting a while ago as she attempts to understand the creatures on Earth, not making much of a differentiation between the humans and bugs, until Garnet lectures her to be more careful. She experiments a bit with Earth accessories like a pair of shorts and paint can leg extenders Steven gave to her, not really understanding the purpose of these things. She learns a bit about culture, trying to read off jokes from a book, as well as watching TV shows Steven shows her and getting involved in shipping discourse. She still doesn't understand anything about Earth, least of all does she understand anything about the gyms, as Amethyst uses her shape-shifting powers to make jokes, and Garnet is fused all the time for no reason, until Amethyst shapeshifts into a chicken, which makes her get the joke about the chicken crossing the road, and then Garnet's permanent fusion is compared to Peridot's favorite chip. In the end, Garnet helps Peridot record one last entry, asking Steven to give the recording device back to her because she'll probably want it again. Peridot wants to defend Earth as she proved last episode. The issue she has though is that she doesn't really know why she wants to defend Earth. This episode is about her learning the why of her actions after the fact. Mostly it's about her seeing the gyms wasting time and effort towards things that are not directly efficient or productive. Amethyst is wasting energy transforming herself, and yet Peridot never really asks how that energy should better be used. After all, she spent the entire season putting all her energy into destroying the planet she now loves, so she can't really judge others for how they spend their time. She wonders why Garnet is spending time fused if she isn't doing anything, because to the gems of Homeworld, fusion is something done out of function or necessity. But Garnet points out that she has a good reason to be fused. She enjoys doing it. Amethyst isn't wasting her energy by transforming because she likes being transformed and can do bits with it. This episode is the conclusion of Season 2, and it doesn't really wrap up the cluster storyline so much as it wraps up the storyline for Peridot. A story about her discovering that the purpose of life is not to blindly obey orders in the interest of being efficient, but to spend your time helping others and having a good time while doing so. This is the end of the video, and a chance for people who are just leaving this on in the background to start looking for something else to put on before the ads or whatever start to play. I'd recommend one of my own videos, but I'm biased in this regard, obviously. This was a part 1 of a 2-part React-trospective of Steven Universe. Part 2 will likely come out near the end of March for channel members, and on the 1st of April for everyone else. As I normally do React-trospective videos in a single go, this provides me with the opportunity to attempt more engagement with my audience than usual. I'm assuming if you've made it to this point of the video, you're either a fan of Steven Universe or a fan of me. Either way, I'm very interested in hearing questions and comments from fans regarding the series thus far. Because, regrettably, there were quite a few conclusions and thoughts that I've had on episodes only after writing about them, or recording the written sections, or even making a conclusion about a plot's parallels to elsewhere as I was in the process of editing and thus too late to include in the video, let alone the script. I know that sometimes the thrill of watching a show comes not only from the show itself, but from showing other people the show and then discussing it with them as they're watching it. I mean, that's kind of the reason I made this channel in the first place. Anyway, this part of the video will be cut out of the inevitable full-length version of the video, so it doesn't really matter what I say here, like, say, several seconds of silence, so the video length comes out to a more even number.